Can I ask members of council to please come up to the council chambers? We have quorum? Members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members, before the recess, we stood down the mayor's second key matter, item EX 8.20, until police staff were available for questions. I am advised that the police staff are now here. We will return to the mayor's key matter together with items EX 8.26 and MM 10.2 after the release of Member Holt and the introduction of certain bills. Okay, do we have any release of members items? Yeah. Yes, Councillor Matlow.
I've been asked to just make a comment about a proclamation. May I just have a moment of a point of privilege to do so?
What is it?
I've been asked to make comment with regard to the fact that there's a proclamation of Toronto's inaugural not-for-profit recognition day. May I just have a moment to just provide a remark about that on a point of privilege on their behalf?
Okay, can you make it quick, please?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Madam Speaker. I'm so pleased that Predatory has proclaimed today, October 2nd, as Toronto's inaugural not-for-profit recognition day, which is now trending on Twitter. Not-for-profit Recognition Day is just one of 13 commitments the City of Toronto made in its for public benefit framework, a policy that we at City Council adopted in 2017 to celebrate and strengthen our working relationship with the not-for-profit sector. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the immense public benefit that the not-for-profit sector brings to our city. These community-based, non-profit organizations range from health and social services to civic engagement, equity and diversity, arts and culture, environmental protection, sports and recreation, and much more. But all have care and service to Torontonians as a core value. Toronto's non-profit sector is key to Toronto's economy, generating revenues at least $14 billion annually, double the impact of the tourism sector, over 8% of our GDP, and providing meaningful work for thousands of people. It's a smart investment of municipal funds. Non-profit organizations help Torontonians live life well. It's a key to strengthening democracy by holding decision makers accountable to all residents and ensuring that the voices of those experiencing social barriers such as poverty are heard. So, to our amazing not-for-profit sector, we say thank you. Thank you for your commitment to creative solutions in the face of great challenges and for your relentless belief in and commitment to making Toronto a better place for us all. When times are tough, the not-for-profit sector does not scale back. It builds, grows, and creates, and for this, we thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Madam Speaker, are we moving to quick releases?
Yes.
Excellent. On page 8, UI 8.14, Metrolink Sphinx West LRT utility relocation. I have spoken with a couple of my colleagues, and I am prepared to move a quick release with a minor amendment. That has been circulated.
Yes, so the amendment has been circulated. So on the amendment, All in favor? Carried. Item is amended.
Record vote.
Recorded vote.
Thank you.
Councillor Cressy, please.
The item as amended is adopted unanimously, 19 in favor.
Councillor Matlow, quick release. Your name's there.
No.
Deputy Mayor Minnan Wong.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe I held 8.4, yes? Oh, pardon me, page 8, North York 8.4. I held one 8.3 or 8.4.
8.3 you held.
Okay, so I need to hold 8.4 so I need to reopen 8.4. They need to be, they're tied together. So, or I'd like to tie them together.
Okay, so
So it's a reopening
there's
of,
a motion to reopen NY 8.4. All in favor? Carried. And you want to deal with both of them together, right?
correct. Thank you. I don't have anything now. But
Yes.
I'll bring that back.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank
Thanks.
you. Councillor Carroll, you have a motion to introduce certain bills.
Speaker. Yes, Madam Speaker, that leave be granted to introduce Bills 1360 to 1364 inclusive.
Shall leave be granted to introduce these bills? Recorded vote.
Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Matlow. Councillor Bylaw, when you're seated.
The motion to introduce the bills carries unanimously, 22 in favor.
Shall these bills be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote. These bills are the two items that Councillor Fletcher, we moved this morning.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Grimes, please.
The motion to enact the bills carries unanimously, 23 in favor.
I've also reviewed a number of urgent motions to be added to the agenda. Councillor Bradford, would you like to introduce on behalf of Councillor Robinson?
Yes, sure. This item is urgent as the TLAB hearing is on January 13th, and the city solicitor requires further instructions to proceed with the hearing for this matter.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Layton? Okay, Counselor Cressy on behalf of Counselor Layton.
Thank you, Speaker. This is urgent as it relates to a TLAB hearing, and the city solicitor requires further instructions.
All in favor? Carried. Counselor Bylaw?
Oh. I do? Oh, yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Requesting the introduction of this item. The deadline to objections was passed, and so we need to do it as soon as possible already.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Counselor Holliday?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to introduce a motion without notice. The reason that it is urgent is because it pertains to a TLAB hearing, and the city solicitor requires direction.
All in favor? Carried. Counselor Cressy?
Thank you, Speaker. This is urgent in order to initiate the planning and design for our upcoming green plan.
All in favor? Carried. Counselor Cressy on behalf of Counselor Layton.
This is urgent. It is a long paragraph on behalf of Councillor Layton, but it's urgent because Councillor Layton said it was urgent, and I'm happy to introduce it on his behalf.
All in favor? Carried. Counselor Bylaw? Oh, Counselor Crawford.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I believe this is a TLAB appeal that is coming up.
All in favor? Carried. Counselor Bylaw?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This motion is urgent, as I think all of us would like to see our director and chief building officials appointed as soon as possible.
All in
No?
all in favor? Carried. Counselor Fillion?
This is urgent because of a TLAB hearing, and we're already somewhat late in giving instructions to the city solicitor.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. Counselor Cole, did you say, I heard you say you wanted to release an item?
I'd like to release item PH 8.4. Had a discussion with staff, and
What's the title? And what's
the title is Toronto Municipal Code, Chapter 363, Construction and Demolition Bylaw Update,
It's on page 7.
page 7.
Counselor Holliday would still like you to hold it.
Sure.
Counselor Cole, still in your name. You don't want it? Okay, so we'll give it to Holliday. Okay. So will now go back to the mayor's second key item, which is EX 8.20, EX 8.26, and MM 10.2. So if we have questions, that we do have the police staff that are here now. So if we have any questions, please put your name up, request to question staff. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll have some questions for our representatives from TPS and then city staff, if that's all right. I'll just begin to the deputy. Thank you for being here. I just want to get a sense of funding requests and commitments from other levels of government for TPS specifically. So in 2018, did we receive any funding commitments, or did we make any requests from either the provincial or federal government?
Through you, Madam Speaker, in 2018, we did have some grant applications that were forwarded both to the provincial and federal government. Most of those were actually denied. We did get $25 million from the provincial government. $19 million was for us, and so about $4.8 million a year. And the remaining $6 million was for the Ministry of the Attorney General. So we over 4 years, we get about $19 million.
All right. So in 2018, we received a $19 million commitment from the province.
Right, over 4 years.
Over 4 years. And in 2019, did we ask for or receive any funding commitments from any of the two levels of government, the province or the feds?
The mayor was able to secure the $4.5 million, which is before you today, and that was $1.5 million from the three levels of governments each. So that's for our project community space, which is currently ongoing. And then we got $3 million in additional funding from the province for the expansion of our public space CCTV program from 34 cameras to 74 cameras, so 40 camera expansion.
Okay, so in 2019, a total of $4.5 million from the province, $3 million for CCTV, and the additional $1.5 million, and then $1.5 million from the feds.
Yeah, so 1 point for the project community space, 1.5 from each level of government, including the city, and then $3 million more in 2019 for the expansion of our CCTV program.
Okay, and so then is it fair for me to say, if I were to add that up, in between 2018, $19 million committed by the province over 4 years, and in 2019, an additional $4.5 million in total committed from the province and $1.5 million from the feds?
Yeah, it works out for the province probably about 1.5 plus 3, 4.5, so it'd be probably about 23 million.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. To Social Development and Finance Administration, in July of 2018, you brought forward a comprehensive combating gun violence strategy with a series of funding requests. What was the total amount of that strategy this council adopted in 2018?
Through the chair, the total ask of the federal government to the National Crime Prevention grant was $32.6 million.
Okay, so this is combating the roots of violence, $32.6 million. And how much did we receive from the feds?
We received funding for $6.8 million over 5 years for the Community Healing Project.
$6.8 million over 5 years.
The outstanding request is $26.2 million.
Have we received any money from the province for funding dealing with our roots of violence programming?
Through the chair, no, we have not. We did make a request of $15 million in 2018.
So we asked for 15 million. We asked for 32 million from the feds, and we received 6. And we asked for 15 million from the province, and we received 0.
Through the chair, correct.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question to Deputy Raymer there. The community police officers we have now, they're going into certain areas. I'll take Councillor Thompson's area, for instance, where they're on the ground, they're on bikes, they're walking, they're in cars. Where are these officers coming from now? Where are they being deployed from? The local division or?
Through Madam Speaker, yes, they are. I mean, they're actually assigned as part of our new neighborhood officer program, and they're coming from various divisions, and they're assigned to some of the priority neighborhoods that we have.
So they're not coming from Councillor Thompson's division, they're coming from other divisions in there?
Yeah, it's a centralized body that we're pulling apart and collecting, and then they're going into the various divisions.
Okay, and in your professional opinion, do we have enough officers on the street? How many officers do we have on the street today? In the deployment?
I think we were averaging around between 4,850 and 4,900 this year, I think, in 20.
4,900? How many should we have?
Well, actually, I don't know what that number is. We're working on, as part of a new shift schedule change, that hopefully if we get the votes necessary and we can move to this new 12-hour shift, we'll be in a better position to determine what our actual numbers are, because there's been a lot of study going into that, so we know what the calls for service are and what the demand requirements are.
All right, so to be clear, we have no idea really right now what that number should be. It should be 5,600, 5,200, 5,300, 48. We have no idea at this point?
Well, I wouldn't say we have no idea. We're thinking around the number of about 5,000 right now, but there's still more analysis required before we make that final determination.
And that 5,000 down from 5,600
That's
a few years
correct.
back.
That's correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, if the Deputy Chief could pass on the thank you from my residents for the incredible work done by the men and women of 13 Division and 53 Division and 32 Division during this summer of hell. They were out there in the front lines from May through this. So just please pass on that thanks. I know I'd like to thank the police for doing a good job, okay? And I'm going to ask questions now. The question is this. I've been having a heck of a time trying to figure out the tracking of bail that is granted. And, you know, we've been told, because, you know, the police frontline officers are very busy. How do we find out if a person is going to a bail hearing? How do we find out if they were given bail? How do we find out if they were released so we could let the public know? Because I've had calls from people saying this dangerous person I hear is going to get out on bail. I'm worried for my life. Can you find out where this alleged criminal is? How do we find out?
Through Madam Speaker, the police service is aware of everyone who receives bail, and we track those people that are on bail, and that's part of our bail compliance program when we're checking on them. For members of the public, people on bail and appearing in court, it's a matter of public record whether they receive bail or they remain in custody or what their conditions are for release.
But in this case, how does a person who wants to go to the bail hearing or submit some information, because in this case I had someone who wanted to go to the bail hearing and tell the authorities that this suspect probably was caught on video breaking and entering in 3 or 4 other synagogues in my riding, in my ward. So he was trying to get this information to the police, and how does he do that or she do that?
Well, if they're aware, I'm assuming they're aware that this individual's been arrested, then they need to contact their local police division and provide that information to investigators.
But it was very difficult for them to do that. Then we tried, we couldn't get the information. How do we have a transparent system where a citizen might be able to know without having to go through the Ministry of the Attorney General, having to go to the counselor's office? How could they find out the status of a bail hearing?
The only way they're going to be able to do that is to contact the investigator, the division that has carriage of the investigation.
Well, anyways, this didn't work. The second thing I was going to ask about is in terms of the deployment of these resources. I know there's a new neighborhood officer program.
That's correct.
So the people in Lawrence Heights in my area have been asking for 15 years for a local police office in Lawrence Heights because the closest station is 8.4 kilometers away, 32 Division. So they've asked, can we have a presence in a community police office in Lawrence Heights? Is that possible?
Is it possible? The reality is what we're trying to do is reduce our footprint and consolidate buildings. So right now, that's where the officers are being deployed from, is 32 Division.
But don't you think it's helpful for the community to get to know the officers face to face, know where to go to talk to them, rather than having to go 8.4 kilometers, where most of them don't have cars, and they want to be able to approach and talk to police officers, and officers that they know where to find them.
Well, I think that's really the purpose of the neighborhood officer program, that the officers are out there every day, and the people in the community are able to know that they're there every day and go out and see them and interact with them.
Why can't I get a neighborhood officer in the TCHC office that's available to sit in there a few hours a day, or be outside, inside with their bikes and everything, but a location in the neighborhood where they're there on a regular basis? I'm not saying 24/7, but what's wrong with having that for the public to reassure them that you can go in your community and find an officer?
Okay, that was your last question. I don't think you can answer that question.
Yeah, no, I
No.
mean, Rita, at this time, we don't have, I mean, we
No.
used to have,
Yeah, I don't think you're in a position to answer that question. Counselor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to Deputy Chief, thank you for coming. Really appreciate all the hard work the men and women in uniform are doing. I was wondering, do you consult with other cities like New York, Detroit, and get lessons for what they do right and what they do wrong? Do you have an ongoing program?
through Madam Speaker, yes, we do. We often consult with other agencies, both in-country and internationally.
According to your stats that we have received, and I will quote her name, Mariana Pelizari, we were able to come up with a table. Now, gun-related matters, 2004, we got a number of 26. In 2018, we got a number of 51. That would be a 50% increase. Would I be correct?
Yes.
Okay. New York City that you consult with, their stats show that in 2004, they had 2,055 shootings, and now they dropped down to 951, which is a 50% decrease. If we're consulting with them, have we asked them what they're doing right or what methods they're using, and they're having less gun violence versus what we have?
Yes, we do consult with them on their way they're doing business and what works and what doesn't work. The reality, though, is New York, their numbers were extremely high, something that even on a per capita basis we've never experienced. So their drop has been quite dramatic.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I can't hear myself.
Okay, counselors?
Thank you. Sorry for that. If we're consulting with them, and are we taking away lessons of what they've done, and are we trying to implement them in Canada?
We do look at some of the things that they're doing well and consider that in the way we do our work here as well. Yes, we do.
Okay. We have, in 2004, according to the stats, 624 people for one police officer, while New York had 216. Is one of the lessons that we learning from them that because they have more officers on the street per people, that maybe we should be moving in that way?
Well, I think that you can't look at that statistic in isolation. Is it a factor, perhaps?
Well, I mean, in 2004, we had one police officer for 624, and now we have one police officer for 767. Well, we have gone up by about 140. They were gone up from 216 to 234, only by 20. I mean, is there something that we can see what they're doing and probably bring it here? I mean, do we need more police officers on the street? Well, I mean, their numbers have not increased, but they were able to get the crime, the shootings down. Is there something there that they're doing that you can share with us, that we can certainly give you the tools in order to do it, or enhance the tools that they have gotten that we don't have?
I don't think there's anything remarkably different that they're doing that we are not. In many cases, what we are doing is we are doing very, very well. You have to remember as well, though, that technology has changed a lot, so we're doing things much more efficiently now than we were in the past.
Okay,
Particularly our intelligence gathering.
fair enough, but their technology and our technology is the same, and yet our guns, I mean, the increase in crime has gone up by 50%, and theirs gone down, lowered by 50. Why that difference?
It's,
Okay,
I don't have an answer for you.
okay, maybe I can reach in and probably get something from you at a later date. Thanks very much, I appreciate it.
Okay. If we could ask questions on the item that we have before us, Councillor Lai? It would be really nice, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I heard about this neighborhood officer program. I'd like to ask a question through you, Madam Speaker, to the Deputy Chief. How many, when did this neighborhood officer program first started?
We've had various forms of officers walking on the beat for years. I mean, we were doing that when I started some 39 years ago. What we have now is an enhanced neighborhood officer program where they're receiving enhanced training in terms of interacting with people, crisis mitigation, the collection of intelligence to share with the other specialized units in the organization. And so currently now we have about 127 full-time neighborhood policing officers.
Oh, that was just my next question was, how many neighborhood officers do we have? 127?
That's correct.
And how many more neighborhood officers do you think we need to cover all the wards in the Toronto?
You know, I don't know that number, but it's definitely more. There's a number of other of our priority neighborhoods that we've identified that we don't have officers currently for. So we are going to need more officers to fulfill that mandate.
So do you think that is a need for us to increase this number of neighborhood officers?
Yes, and that's part of our plan to do that with our ongoing hiring that we have underway.
I see. And this additional funding that we're allocating to you, have you considered that we're going to add some more of these neighborhood officers with these additional funding that you get?
The current funding that we have with respect to community space, if that's what you're referring to, is just a short-term initiative that's going until the beginning of November, and that's an immediate attempt to address some of the violence on the street.
Okay. Do you know what is the annual cost of adding one neighborhood officer in the city, in TPS?
Each neighborhood is
about 600. One individual officer is about $140,000.
For one individual officer annually?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the Deputy Chief. I wanted to ask about, I guess, what are called ghost guns and 3D guns, and how we're doing. Has there been an increase in those in Toronto? I guess ghost guns in particular?
When you're referring to ghost guns, you mean?
Well, my understanding is you can buy a component of a gun called a receiver. Somebody can go to the hardware store, look online and buy parts for it, and then build a gun with no serial number and go and sell them.
Yeah, through Madam Speaker, yes. I mean, we haven't seen a dramatic increase, but they are out there. We are doing. We're seeing guns that are being modified. You might see starter pistols that are modified. We're seeing where they're importing component parts from, say, the United States and then putting the weapon together here. So we are seeing some of that, yes. But I wouldn't say that it's increased significantly.
Okay. Can you, I guess those different parts, can I go to like a store and buy them in Toronto, or that's something I'd have to buy through the States, I guess, or another country through the mail?
That's correct. That's being imported.
They'd all be imported.
That's correct.
And that's something that we would need a stronger enforcement measures with Canada Post or the RCMP.
Yeah, and CBSA, yes, and they are involved in that. We work together with those agencies and trying to prevent that. And as I indicated already, we're not seeing a dramatic increase in that area.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. I'm just going to ask that there does seem like there's a lot of the shootings, and we've talked about this before, whether they're actual deaths or just shootings that are related to Toronto Community Housing or tenants from Toronto Community Housing. Whoever would like to answer that.
Through Madam Speaker, yes. I mean, our community housing area is problematic for us.
Do we have an idea of the percentage?
I couldn't give you offhand what the percentage is in TCHC buildings, no.
TCHC buildings are related to TCHC? What if I said 40, 50%?
Well, you know, I don't want to speculate too much. It is a substantial number. I know in the northwest corner we're probably seeing about 35% of our shootings, and there's a number of TCHC buildings there as well. I'd have to investigate that number to give you a conclusive answer.
So you could get back. So just when those buildings and those tenants, et cetera, that are involved, what is your, what does the operation look like that's related to those difficult tenancies and those shootings from your perspective with TCHC?
Could you perhaps elaborate in terms of what you're asking?
Well, we're talking about putting in more officers, but what is your structural and institutional relationship with Toronto Community Housing in order to be as proactive as possible with these situations, not after they've happened, but prior?
Actually, we have a good cooperative relationship with TCHC, and in fact, I've had a couple of my officers that oversee the Special Constable Program taking ride-alongs with the members of the TCHC security to get a better understanding of where the problems are, where the weaknesses are in terms of how we can improve that relationship and the sharing of information, and we're working on that.
So I've just had 2 shootings over the weekend in one of my communities. Who at Central Command is kind of overseeing everything related to relationships with Toronto Community Housing?
We have in our Public Safety Command, one of our staff superintendent oversees that relationship with them.
With the CSU or with?
With TCHC.
With CSU or with the CEO or with the COO, or what's that relationship and where?
It's with the chief of their security team, primarily is who we deal with.
So the special constable, the head of
That's correct.
special. So the actual, and then do you develop a plan for each neighborhood? Are you part of planning responses ahead of time and proactively planning?
No, I'm not. I mean, each division will work with their respective members that are working at TCHC within each division.
So each division is working, somebody at headquarters works with CSU, and are you expecting that there'll be a plan for these communities from your officers or not?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I've had members of our PSU unit actually riding along with their officers to see where there are weaknesses in terms of the relationship and what can be done better. So we actually oversee the program, but the individual interaction is with each respective division.
So the limits or the structure that you work with is with the special constables?
That's correct.
There is no direct relationship with the CEO or the COO or any other, the management of Toronto Community Housing from Toronto Police?
On an occasional basis, we will meet, but the primary relationship on a regular basis is with the TCHC security.
Thank you. That's very informative.
Thank you. Councillor Perks, question?
Thank you. I guess my question is for staff from Social Development. A little over a decade ago, we had what was called the Summer of the Gun. And in response to that, the province of Ontario conducted probably one of the most comprehensive studies of why violence occurs in our community, the Roots of Violence report.
Through the speaker, yes, that's true.
Yeah, and, you know, that report went to other countries, met with young people, met with families, met with service delivery people. They did literature reviews, commissioned studies. It's probably the most comprehensive piece of work on violence in urban areas ever done in Canada.
Through the speaker, yes, that's true.
Does it make a single recommendation encouraging that we have more police?
Through the speaker, no.
Thank you.
Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, and through you to our Deputy Chief. Just to clarify, because there were some questions asked and I heard some answers, but I just wanted to be crystal clear. The $4.5 million that's proposed in this, the letter from the mayor, what services did it purchase us? What did we get for that? And when did that service, enhanced service, begin?
It started at, through Madam Speaker, it started approximately around the 15th of August. And it's about improved data and intelligence collection, bail compliance checks, increased uniform visibility, as well as specialized investigations.
And how long does that service last for?
It's 12 weeks, I believe. 11 weeks.
And so when will be the end date of this enhanced service?
October 31st.
October 31st. So the service has already been procured. We've already received it mostly in the streets. We've got about 4 weeks left to the program. With respect to the questions from some of my colleagues, they've been asking about neighborhood officers, which is a very popular program, I'd say. It's been proven to be very effective. None of this money goes to hiring dedicated neighborhood officers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is there, obviously in the 2020 budget, there will be a request to expand the dedicated neighborhood officer program?
That's correct.
But that's not what's before us today.
That's correct.
So if we vote to support this particular request, which is drawing $1.5 million from the tax stabilization reserve, so that we can put in the city's portion to meet the province and the federal government at one-third, we don't necessarily get to influence how that money is to be spent because it's already been predetermined. Is that correct?
As part of the project that was put forward, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just through you to the Deputy. So, Deputy, just following on the question from Councillor Wong Tam, the projects for the expenditure of the funds have already been structured, resources have been allocated as it relates to this particular program. You talk about intelligence gathering, data gathering, and so on. Is that correct?
Madam Speaker, that's correct.
Right. Could you tell us this acute problem that we're having with guns in the city, where are the guns coming from and how are they getting here and how are we addressing in terms of the intelligence gathering and so on? Do we know who some of these sources are?
It's something that's evolving all the time, and we are working with our partners. The border points, of course, we're getting a substantial number. Well, over 50% are being imported from the United States, and whether that's Windsor, Sarnia, Kingston, and even more locally in terms of ship traffic coming across from the United States.
Right. I was elected in 2003, and we went through varying periods. The Versace boys and the Malvern crew and all of those folks and so on, and lots of work were done in terms of addressing those people. Many were arrested and brought back out on bail and a variety of things, and we saw an increase in terms of activities and so on that took place. So my question to you would be, given your experience and given the experience of the service, with respect to legislators, what rules, what laws do we either have to tighten up, we have to change, or new ones that we have to implement that could help you and the officers to protect our society?
Well, from my standpoint, one of the enhancements that needs to be made, or one of the changes, is more stricter rules with respect to bail. We're seeing quite often, whether it's victims or the people we arrest for these shootings, that they are previously been on bail, and that's a significant problem for us.
Right.
And it's a frustrating problem, quite frankly.
Okay. The issue around having people come to help the police in terms of providing information, there's a level of fear that occurs in our society, notwithstanding the contribution of the $4.5 million that we're saying this is how we're going to spend it. But there is a vacuum there that exists with respect to community members wanting to come out to provide information to the police because they don't feel secure thereafter, because they feel that if they speak to the police, they themselves could be put in jeopardy. I'm just wondering from you, with respect to your professional experience, what more can we do in terms of witness protection and a mechanism to actually help people in neighborhood? And the second component part of the question, are there some additional ways beyond Crime Stoppers and so on that, for example, the police could come up with to allow people to be able to talk with them without necessarily going into a police station? Many years ago, I'd said maybe we can use some of the businesses in our community where police officers could actually go in and meet them there, and people don't realize that they're going to talk to the police. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, are there some additional thoughts with respect to this?
Well, let me preface my comments by saying, first of all, that I understand the situation that people who are witnesses find themselves in speaking, because they do feel unsafe, particularly in some of our more vulnerable communities. Yes. The reality is, once you're talking to the police at any point in time, it's subject to disclosure and it becomes part of the court process. So really, the Crime Stoppers program is really the key program for people to call in. And that's way people can remain anonymous and they can be therefore protected.
Right. The region is experiencing a wave of gun violence. Is there a regional cooperation, regional initiative that's actually in place working with either Durham, Peel, and Toronto, and I don't know, by extension, the RCMP? Are those work being done now?
Yes, there is, and that's always ongoing, and particularly in relation to this program. We are dealing with Halton Regional, Peel Regional, York Regional Police, the OPP, and Durham Regional Police on this initiative. So there's a liaison going back and forth with all those jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Menenwong.
Yep, thank you, Madam Chair. So, everything we read, or a lot of things we read, says that bans on guns don't work because they're all illegal, et cetera. And there's a lot of discourse about you mentioned the illegal importation of illegal weapons. But I haven't seen a lot of discourse about whether it's possible and what resources it would take. And it's outside the Toronto Police Services, of course, but since we have you here, I thought I'd ask. Has there been any discussion or any analysis of whether it's possible to stop significantly the importation of illegal weapons?
Through Madam Speaker, what I can tell you is that collectively all the agencies, the RCMP, the OPP, CBSA, ourselves with our own fire enforcement unit, we're all working collectively to try to stem that tide of weapons coming in from the United States.
So I'm not saying that you're not working hard at it, but the outcome seems to be not the outcome that we want. And I'm just, how do we achieve the outcome that we want, that being the reduction of the importation? It's now, people are still getting shot. So I think that the normal man on the street might say, you're trying really hard. All of you folks, the protective services, customs, you name it, all the RCMP, et cetera, are working very hard, but we're not moving the needle. It's actually going the other way. So what does government need to do? Is it possible to stop? Is it possible to stop it? There's the question.
I don't know if we'll ever get to the point that it's stopped, but we have to
reduce
keep
significantly.
Yeah, we have to. We have
to the point where that we'll notice it in this city.
I think we have to keep doing what we're doing and make sure that we're focused on that as a priority.
Pardon me?
I think we need to keep doing what we're doing and ensuring that we're focusing enough resources on that as a priority.
Are we focusing enough resources on stopping weapons coming in from across the border?
We have a group within our organization, the Firearms Enforcement Unit, that are working solely on that endeavor. And so we have the resources focused on it.
So you have your resources focused on it. So my question is, I'm just trying to zero in on, tell me what you need. What is it that you need? You said you're focused on it. I get that, but obviously it's not enough. What is it that you need to reduce the weapons? What does, and not just the Toronto Police Service, I'm talking, what is all your team and associates, what is it they need to achieve, to make measurable achievements? What more?
I think the priority would be stronger legislation to keep people who are charged not released on bail, and perhaps stronger sentences.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes, you wanted to acknowledge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. We have a
I-
very fitting topic on gun violence and keeping our youth out of trouble. We have some very special youth here today. They're down to meet the mayor here at 3 o'clock today. And I'm sure my colleague, Councillor Bradford, who has a hotbed of lacrosse in the beaches, know the Mimico Mountaineer team here, the Bantam-A champions in box. They went undefeated in box this year, the best in the province, 20-0. And then on field, they were 20-0, and then in box lacrosse, they won another great record. Combined, this team was 47-3, and the best in the province at their age, the Bantam-A. They represent Mimico. Congratulations, guys.
How about long branch?
That's right. And I'd like to acknowledge also Brad McDonald, coached both those teams. They're coaches here today, so great job with those kids. It's an absolute fantastic record for that team, and they're excited to meet the mayor. We're going to recognize them later on up in Chambers at 3. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor
Go to
Grimes.
school.
Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a very quick question. I just wanted to ask, what percentage of guns that are involved in crime originate in Canada?
That number has changed over the years, but roughly the argument, or what we put forward now is that it's a number greater than 50% that's coming in from the United States.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it for the questions. We'll go to the speakers. Mayor Tory.
Madam Speaker, I just want to sketch out a bit of the background. I'm, of course, going to be supporting, and I have a motion here, by the way, which is meant to implement some of the aspects that go beyond 2019, which I think Councillor Carroll's going to look after by way of a small amendment to her own motion, which of course I support. So that motion we'll just put up there, and we'll have that circulated. I want to just put into context how the original item that we've now put together with Councillor Carroll and your motion to do with investment in communities came about. I've always said, and I maintain this position, and I will continue to maintain it because I've never been advised otherwise by any of those who we rely on for advice, that there are three principal categories through which we can help stem gun violence. Support for the police, of which this $1.5 million fits within. Change laws and make them more effective, which we talk about in the context of gun laws or bail laws and others, and investing in neighborhoods and kids and families. And I think that is a bit of a simplification, but it's I think a fair one into which you can, group most of the things that we have some responsibility to do. In August of this year, and frankly it was not that much different in August of last year, there was a dramatic uptick in shooting incidents taking place in neighborhoods across the city. And I was hearing a lot about it. I was hearing a lot about it when I was out in the city, which, as you know, I spent quite a bit of time doing, from members of the public. I was hearing from councillors. I was hearing from community leaders. And people were anxious, to say the least. People were anxious. I did not feel that it was an appropriate answer for me to give them, well, you know what, we're going to have a meeting on October the 2nd, and we'll see what we can get approved at that time, and so I'll get back to you. I felt that it was my responsibility as the one person who's elected across the city, and hearing as I was from people across the city about this, to ask the police chief, which was the first thing I did, what assistance could you use to help you to deal with this very acute situation we face now that is leading to an extremely elevated level of anxiety on the part of the people in neighborhoods across the city, and what do you need? He came back and told me he needed some resources, which in the end totaled about $4.5 million. And the purposes of it were discussed by Deputy Raymer: increased intelligence gathering on guns and gangs in particular, in specialized investigations on guns and gangs, increased bail inspections, and an increased police presence in some of the neighborhoods. And I've heard from Councillor Cole, from people who live in Lawrence Heights, and from other people across the city. They've noticed, Speaker Nunziata has made mention of the fact that they've noticed the increased police presence and they were reassured by it, which was very important. I mean, I believe one of the most important things we can do is to sort of try and calm people, in addition to taking specific measures to address the violence when these kinds of things come about. As correctly reported by the Globe and Mail on the day in question, it said that I pledged money at the municipal level. The city would be providing $1.5 million, a commitment he will seek approval for at City Council's next meeting. And that is an accurate summation of exactly what, of course, I knew was the way the system works around here and that it would be followed. And here we are today actually giving formal approval to that. But I was confident all the way through, as I also said publicly, that that measure, that commitment would be approved by the council because they knew it was something that was properly done and that we could get on with it. Because I felt that I couldn't go to the other governments as I did and ask them to share it, and I felt a fair basis upon which to share it was a third, a third, and a third, without us saying we were in. And so I said we were in, but I said it had to be brought to council, and on the basis of all that, the other governments stepped up. Now, I will just say that left outstanding 2 files, and that wasn't meant to be a solution. It was meant to be an additional measure we could take in the month of August and in the September and October period to deal with a very acute problem we faced at that time. But I knew we also had the challenge of seeking changes to the laws and advocating in that regard, including bail and sentencing. And I will just say I've been trying to do that on a very regular basis, joined by some other councillors doing it on behalf of the people of the City of Toronto, who I think strongly concur in the need to face up to the fact that these laws and the way they're being applied at the moment are not working. And that goes all the way from the courtrooms and the judges all the way through the system. We've had some help from the province on that. But I want to finish just by talking about the investments in kids and families and again extend my gratitude to Councillor Carroll and to yourself, Madam Speaker, for bringing forward this motion that allows us to do something at this point in time. But just to say, I have been disappointed, to be quite frank, in the degree to which the federal government has not stepped up and done what they told me they would do face to face. I heard it from the Prime Minister, from the ministers and so on, that we would, let's put it this way, a lot more of our applications for $32 million would be approved than the $6-point-some-odd million that actually were approved. And I registered that disappointment again when the Prime Minister came to visit me a few weeks ago and began a program, or at least an initiative to lobby on that went way beyond, in terms of time spent, what I spent on guns or on laws. And I think part of the result of that is that we've seen commitments from the political parties, because I raised it with all of them, from the Liberals, $50 million new per year, of which we'll get our share, and from the NDP, $20 million new per year. And I take some encouragement from that, dependent again on the results of the election. But I will just say that I believe hugely in these programs, but I also believe very strongly it should not be the responsibility of city taxpayers alone to fund these programs. They are social programs. They're vital social programs. We will continue to invest in them, but we need those other governments as partners. So I hope people will support all 3 of these items taken together today, because I think they will move us a tiny step forward, but with much, much more to be done on all fronts. And I look forward to working with colleagues and with the other governments and with the police, who are trying very hard, I think, to help us with this in addressing those challenges. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. And I have 2 amendments. The first, which is an amendment to EX 8.20, is to affirm City Council's request that the federal government ban the availability, sale, and possession and use of handguns across Canada, not just here. And my second amendment, which is on EX 8.26, is that just as the Mayor has moved the recommendation calling on the feds to provide the outstanding funding, it's to call on the province to provide the outstanding funding that we have also requested and which we have not received. There's been, in my 5 years here on council, and this goes way back, I think a painful annual tradition whereby we have shootings in the summer followed by announcements of funding for enforcement, much needed enforcement. Meanwhile, the work we do around the roots of violence remains unfunded. And that's an annual tradition we see. And it was last summer, in the wake of far too many shootings and the very public and painful Danforth shootings, it was just last summer that we as a council came together to call for a comprehensive approach that, as the mayor just spoke to, talked about 3 pillars: effective gun control, effective enforcement, and investments in programs that tackle the roots of violence. So a year and a half later, and where are we? On gun control, we have, I think, helped to lead a call across this country for more effective gun control. Not just for cities to ban handguns in their city, but in all jurisdictions right across this country, so that somebody can't buy a handgun, sell it, or have it stolen and walk it across one city border to another. Ban them all. But gun control is a part of it. We've taken action, I think, as a city to lead that conversation. Effective and community-based enforcement is another pillar. And I should note that in the last year and a half, we have secured $25 million new dollars from the province and the federal government towards that pillar. $25 million new dollars. But that leaves us where we always get left, which is on the actual programs that actually tackle the preventative roots of violence. The programs from focus tables to pre-charge diversion to mentorship and youth employment, those programs, a year and a half ago, we called for $42 million in funding from both levels of government. We've received 7. And this is what happens every year. The shootings happen in the summer. Somehow we come together and we find that money for enforcement. It's not that it's not necessary, but somehow we always find that money, $25 million new dollars. But when it comes to the actual preventative programs, they're not funded at the same rates. And so I'm supporting the recommendations in front of us. I'm happy to say that we're investing in enforcement, and I'm supporting that. But I'm pretty sure that next summer we will be in the same situation. Next summer, we won't have set up the actual preventative programs because they're not funded yet, which means they won't be rolled out in June. So next summer, those programs won't be there. Shootings will occur, and we will find more money for enforcement. And we will have this debate again. Thank you.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Yesterday I was in the community, and this mother said to me, Councillor, can you help me? My 18-year-old son that I've known since he was a...
Do you have a motion?
Yes, I do, too.
Okay.
I think they gave it to me. Yeah.
There, it's on the screen. It's on the screen.
Okay. That City Council requests the City Manager report to Executive Committee on the feasibility of creating a safe community safety and security infrastructure program to fund such things as extra lighting, traffic calming, and management plans to enhance public safety. Okay, I'm moving that because I think we've got to do a bit more than on top of enforcement and on top of investing in long-term solutions. Because right now, I know the people in my community are asking for simple things like speed bumps, like pinching roads, because the shooters race up and down the highway of the inner city, shooting at people in buildings. And they also, what they do is they also sell their drugs and race out of the neighborhood on these highways running through my neighborhood. I'm saying, please give me a little bit of money so we can put in some pinch points and maybe some stop signs. And so I would hope, I was told, well, listen, you have to put these requests in. You might get them in 6 months if there's money in the budget. So this is what the community is asking for, just some traffic controls that might be part. It's not going to be the magic solution, but a little bit of money for that too. But anyways, yesterday I was talking to a mother. She said, my 18-year-old is hanging around with dangerous people. I'm afraid he's going to get killed any day now if he doesn't get any help. Can I get him into the Army? I said, he's got to be willing to sign up. I said, well, is he in school? No, he's not out of school. And she said to me, I bought 2 pairs of shoes for my younger children. The shoes were gone. New shoes, back to school, gone, because the 18-year-old needed money. This is the reality we talk about the root of violence and everything. Then the 15-year-old, her 15-year-old, is a great basketball player. He made a team, but he can't play for the team because the team requires $500 for, travel, incidentals. So she's asking me, where can I get $500 so my 15-year-old can pursue his basketball wishes? And I said, well, have him write me a letter. I'll try to get him $500 somehow. That's the reality. So there are all kinds of great programs, but then you have these individual situations where these kids, again, this 18-year-old, if he doesn't get some kind of intervention, he's going to end up dead. And the mother is warning me right now. I just want to say, in terms of, we get all kinds of people making suggestions on how we deal with gun violence and crime. We know that enforcement is critical, and the police have done a job beyond and above the call of duty this last summer. But we know ultimately they can only do so much. And that's why I sort of grimace when people say, well, we need more cops like Chicago. I says, yeah, well, Chicago's got about 3 times the number of police officers we do, and they got 530 murders this year. So you want to be like, so policing alone isn't going to solve. They say, oh, bring back capital punishment. I says, yeah, they have capital punishment in the state. That really reduces crime in the States. So there aren't these magic solutions. It's hard work by the schools, the community workers, parents, and in cooperation with the government of Ontario, the government of Canada. We're all in this together, and it's a grind. You got to keep investing in kids, keep investing in families. And then in the middle of all this, I find out the provincial government pulls $14 million from a community center. And I'm saying, here, I'm trying to deal with this reality where kids can go to a safe place, and I find out, well, we took out the 14 million, you don't need it. You can wait. So how in the heck are we ever going to get anywhere if we've got yin and yang and juxtaposed realities here? The poor kid who's 15 can't find $500, the other kid that's going to get killed if something doesn't happen, and then the government takes away $14 million for a community center. Go figure that out.
Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I will not be voting to support the City of Toronto putting in its 1/3 of the money for additional resources for the Toronto Police Service to deal with this problem. Councillor Cole just actually hit the nail on the head. Look around the world. Places that have larger police forces do not necessarily have less violence. In fact, they often have much more. People who, jurisdictions where the penalties or where the legal system is much more punitive do not have less violence. In fact, it's usually much more. So in an effort to try to understand what actually worked, the province of Ontario did what city staff agreed is probably the most comprehensive look at why violence occurs in our communities ever done anywhere in Canada, the Roots of Violence report. And to be clear, the 2 co-chairs or principal authors of that report, Roy McMurtry, a former Conservative cabinet minister, and Alvin Curling, former Liberal Conservative or Liberal cabinet minister. Not, a bunch of long-haired, sandal-wearing lunatics, but people on the right and center of the political spectrum. They said, go tell us what actually works. Why does this happen and how do we prevent it? And in broad strokes, what they found is that if you create a class of people in your society who from their earliest years live in poverty and are treated as second-class citizens and don't have access to the same kinds of services and supports growing up as the rest of us do, they will develop a number of things that lead them on the path of violence. They will feel socially excluded, that the system doesn't work for them. I mean, we worry when we do our budget about whether it's going to be too tough on homeowners. This group of young men can't even imagine the idea that they would ever own a home. It's laughable to them. And yet we sit here and debate about how to protect homeowners. They're aware these debates happen. They know that we don't talk about protecting them. We've had 10 years of austerity since that report came out. where budget after budget after budget, programs that could actually be providing the social and community supports to help these young men grow into people who could be city councillors or police officers or business executives or environmental activists or whatever the hell, they know there's no path for them because we don't make the investments to create that path. So there's a sense of social isolation, that society doesn't work for them, and they turn their back on society. Further, by not having those supports made available, by not having good mentors in their schools and community centers and neighborhood, they don't develop the same coping mechanisms that the rest of us do for dealing with anger and conflict. And they become, believe it or not, cognitively less likely to be able to deal with conflict without turning to violence. This is all work that has been available to every member of Toronto City Council for 12 years now. And they tell us exactly what we need to do so that we do not have summers with shootings and more shootings and more shootings and retaliatory shootings and ever-escalating bunch of violence. They don't say put more police officers in that neighborhood. They don't say surveil people more. They don't say provide more money for tracking criminals. They don't say make it harder to get bail. They say none of that. They say invest in young people, in low-income and racialized groups in the City of Toronto. Show them a path. Tell them they're as welcome to succeed as anyone else, and that we believe in their futures because we're investing in their futures. And here we are once again today, privileging a response that does not invest in them, but invests rather in the tools to constrain, control, arrest, incarcerate, and make homeless the people who are living in fragile communities. It is 100% the wrong way to go. The evidence collected by our own provincial government in the deepest study ever done on this question supports that. Roy McMurtry, the former Attorney General of the province of Ontario, a conservative, supports that approach. Alvin Curling, a great community leader, supports that approach. We all say we support that approach, but when it's time to put our money where our mouth is, we don't.
Councillor Lai.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion, please. I don't think there's a quick solution to combat violence, especially in cities as big as Toronto. But I do applaud the mayor for actually stepping up to show some quick fix for increasing the budget for the police force. But I do believe that investing in the neighborhood officers program is just like investing in our youth, because we have this program to interact with our youth so that they will build relationship, and those are long-term relationship. And I do believe this will help address the root cause of the crime and violence. And in building strong, trusting community relations, it is important that we invest in the resources required to make the neighborhood officer program even more successful. I've attended a presentation by the Deputy Chief in Scarborough regarding the neighborhood officer program recently. And they were telling me that in places like Melbourne, I got half of the Melbourne ward, and because of this program, it really have shown drastic improvement. And I was also told in this presentation that they need at least 20 neighborhood officer to be able to do a better job to make sure that we can interact with the youth and with all these gangs in the neighborhood. So I do think that it's very important that we ensure there's enough neighborhood officers in every ward and community, especially in those ethnically diverse neighborhoods. We're building trust and working together to combat crime and violence is very important. And that's why I will make this motion to make sure that we'll get enough funding going forward as a long-term investment so that we can actually ask the city to consider more funding for this NOP program during the 2020 budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lai. Councillor Pasternak? You ready to go, Councillor Pasternak? Yep.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. This is one of the most difficult pieces of public policy that this council has ever had to deal with, because when it comes to community violence, you have so many victims across the spectrum. You have the victim of gun violence who's either been wounded or killed or threatened. The perpetrator is someone who has fallen off the radar screen, who has either given up on the school system or the school system has given up on them. You have a situation in which shootings in various neighborhoods create fear. And fear is one thing we don't want in our local communities. In the area I represent, over the past week, 3 people have been murdered by guns. And the fear among the communities that these events occurred in is growing. And it's our responsibility here to do everything we can to reduce it. But the problem we face is many of the solutions, the real solutions to this, are not decided on this council floor. The border control is clearly federal jurisdiction, and more resources have to be put into making sure that illegal handguns do not come across the border. Much of the criminal justice system is controlled by the province, whether it's bail conditions, whether it's parole conditions, whether it's sentencing, once again, out of our jurisdiction. Keeping kids in school as long as possible is perhaps the greatest hedge against violence on our city streets. Making sure that that our kids finish high school, potentially graduate on to post-secondary, go into a profession or a skill. But once again, that's out of our jurisdiction. That is the local school boards and the province and the Ministry of Education. Councillor Perks is quoting a study that's 10 years old, saying we're not really up to the task of providing much of the social network that he listed, that we've let everybody down. But we're spending more on daycare, more on social housing, more on recreation, more of interventions, more on poverty reduction than ever before. And yet we seem to be falling further and further behind. So I have no motion. I have no solutions. Certainly I'm going to support what's before us, because our responsibility is to at least try the various things that are within our jurisdiction so that we can reduce gun violence, we can prevent gun violence, but we need our other levels of government to come forward to make sure we can stop gun violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Speaker Nunziata is next.
Yes, thank you. I will be supporting the 3 items and the motions that we have before us. The reality is that there are certain parts of the city, Northwest in particular, and Councillor Cole's ward, Councillor Ford's ward, and my ward, where we have increased gun violence. And the reality is that the community is asking that they want more police presence in these communities because they feel unsafe. I had recently, I've had quite a few homicides in my ward, but recently when I had the 16-year-old that was killed at one of the Toronto housing buildings, I had a meeting where we had Chief Saunders, we had Toronto Community Housing, we had over 200 tenants from Toronto Housing, and one thing they said to me, yelling at me, is that we want more police officers. These are the mothers of the victim. We want more police officers. They do not feel safe. That's what they ask for. We want more security and more police officers. So we need to invest in these communities for the community, these residents, tenants that don't feel safe around in their buildings and in their communities. I know with 12 division officers are doing an amazing job with the youth in the community, especially in the Falstaff community. They work with Toronto Community Housing. They do sports programs, boxing programs to work with the youth. I recently had a forum where I had the youth attend at Falstaff, where I had young boys, young girls. They came to this forum that I had, and we talked. It was just between us. Nobody was present but myself and my staff and the staff from the community center, and asked the youth one-on-one, what is it that you want? What is it that you need in this community? And it's amazing how they opened up, and each one of them was asked a question, and they answered on exactly what they would like to see improvements in their community. That's what we need to do more of, is engage directly with the youth. The problem I have is some of the recommendations, investing in communities, giving more funding to agencies. The problem I have with that is the money that we're giving to these agencies, in particular, that I'm aware of, is not doing what they should be doing with the youth. And we should be involving the youth more and engaging the youth and investing directly to the youth, not through agencies. And that's the problem that I have with the investments that we have made in the community. Because, you know, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Pasternak. We've been given a lot of money to communities. And I know a number of agencies that have been receiving funding, and there are no results whatsoever, and that's what I'm not happy with. The bail, stronger legislation, that's been an issue that's come up at the Police Services Board numerous times. We will be dealing with that issue, and that comes up with the community, from residents, and you know, we need to work with the federal and the provincial government, and because we can't do it just the city, we have to work with the different levels of government. But the reality is, and members of council that don't support adding more police officers or having police presence in their ward, I'd like for them to walk down and go into these communities where residents and tenants from Toronto Housing are afraid to walk outside because they're afraid of the gun violence, and see if they want more police officers or not, because they're asking for additional police officers, and they want that security. They need that security. So we need to work together with Toronto Housing, with the police, and with the city, and to make our streets a lot safer. Yes, we need to invest in communities, but at the same time, we need to invest directly to the youth and not invest into some of these agencies that are not doing what they should be doing, that's doing absolutely nothing, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Councillor Wong Tam is next.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm a little bit torn, I must admit, and I'm torn largely because, number one, I do think that it's very important for us to invest in community-based policing, and I do believe it's very important for us to actually empower the Toronto Police with the tools that they need to do the job that they have to do. The reason I'm torn is because the mayor had only asked Chief Saunders, what does he need? And if he had asked local communities, what did they need? Or perhaps additional young people, what do they need? They would have gotten some different answers. And some of the answers they would have provided would have been additional youth outreach workers, expanding community center hours, investing in diversion programs, after-school programs, expanding and doubling the youth hubs that we had a chance to do in 2018 at a cost of about $3.5 million, which would have doubled that quantity, and would have put a young person within 2 kilometers of every single youth hub. They would have probably said they need a pathway to education and they need apprentice programs. And so depending on who you ask, you're going to get a slightly different answer. So that's why I'm torn. I think that what's really important here is, I mean, what's done is now before us. And certainly we need to pay up our portion. I will grant that to the mayor. And I know that he was doing everything he can within the powers based on what he knew was to be right. But I also I'm also very concerned that we missed the mark on a whole bunch of other things. And those other things had everything to do with, how do we measure outcomes? So $4.5 million goes out, and we were told that we're going to get enhanced services, and we got about just under 11 weeks of that enhanced service. But what did we get for that beyond what was described? Did we get the outcome that we would have received? Beyond the fact that you had a bit more uniformed police presence, that there was specialized intelligence gathering, that was going to be some deeper drilling down on special investigations in guns and gangs. Did we get more than that? And is it sustainable in the long run? And I'm concerned that it is not. So then at the end of the day, when we have finite dollars, did we make the best investment? So I want to just highlight in 2018, we had a young individual by the name of Mackay Jackson who was shot in our neighborhoods right here in downtown Toronto. And Mackay was supposed to be playing basketball at Regent Park at the community center, but instead his community center was used and we built it out as an emergency shelter for those who were displaced from 650 Parliament in that catastrophic failure and fire. If you ask that community, would Mackay be with us today if that community center was open when he needed it with this after-school program? My community would say yes, because he would have been exactly where he was supposed to be and not anywhere else. And so that's the lesson that I will take away as I think about how I'm going to vote on this, because the communities that I've served have said, yes, we want more dedicated neighborhood officers, and we're so grateful for that program because it's very popular and very effective. That's the right type of community-based policing. But they're not asking, to be quite honest, for more just random police presence or more just specialized investigations. That is not what they're asking for. There's been talk about bans on handguns, and I just want to speak briefly on that for just a few minutes, Madam Speaker. In 2012, Bill C-19, ending the long gun registry, was passed, and include the removal of important tools to trace firearms across Canada. And it also meant that Canada was walking away from our international obligations to restrict the firearms trade. In 2013 and 2016, Madam Speaker, criminal incidents involving firearms went up by 30%. Gun homicides increased by 60%. Gender-based violence involving firearms went up by 1/3. And after decades of decline, all of a sudden, firearm suicides were going through the roof because of the relaxed laws on gun control. And different firearms are used differently, and I just want to highlight this because there's been talks about handguns. And let's say, like, we need to actually ban all guns. Unless you actually are a police officer or you actually are a member of the military, you should not have guns. And this is where the federal government, this one and the one prior, has failed us. Handguns are often used in gang-related violence. Military assault weapons are used in mass shootings. Hunting rifles and shotguns are used in domestic homicides, suicides, and police shootings. Do we need a ban on handguns in Toronto? Yes, we need a ban on handguns across the country, but we also need to have stricter gun control right across. Thank you very much.
Councillor Carroll. Oh. Oh, Councillor Karygiannis?
Yes, I know.
Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion. If it can be put up, I'll appreciate it. Madam Speaker, this is a request the city manager to reach out to other jurisdictions in North America, including New York, to examine how these jurisdictions have been able to reduce the occurrences of violent gun crimes. 2, request that the city manager work with all relevant city divisions and the Toronto Police Services to implement lessons learned from other jurisdictions to reduce the occurrences of gun violence in Toronto. Madam Speaker, further to what I was saying, I do have a couple of graphs that I want to share with my colleagues. You will notice that since 2004 to 2018, our population has gone up by about 500,000 people. The occurrences is from 26 in 2004 to now to 51. We have police constables that were 3,975 in 2004. Right now, that has dropped down to 3,829. We have 624 people per police officer, and our budget has gone up by about $300 million. Madam Speaker, if we were to look at a graph of population of Toronto, we'll see that it's going up steadily. If we were to look at a graph at the shooting occurrences, you'll notice that that graph, although it spiked in 2006, the year of the gun, the summer of the gun, that graph has gone up also steadily. Persons per officer, we have gone from 600 plus people per one officer up to 700 plus. Now, Madam Speaker, if you were to compare this to New York City, New York City in 2004 had a population of 7.9 million and right now has a population of 8.3. The shootings in New York in 2006 were 2,055. This very moment, they're down to 951. The population of New York, like the population of Toronto, has risen. Police officers per person in New York, they started at 215, right now they're at 235. So there's more police officers per people in New York than we do have in Toronto. Madam Speaker, however, this is the graph that says it all. In 2006, in New York City, there were 2,055 related incidents of shooting and deaths. In 2018, there were 955. Madam Speaker, clearly there's jurisdictions that have done good work. In listening to the Deputy Chief, he says that they're reaching out to other regions within the North America. However, those regions is something that we need to engage, and that's why I'm asking my colleagues to support the motion that our city manager talks to those regions along with the police, and we find solutions that they have and what they've tried in order to make it work in Canada. Madam Speaker, in New York City, you're allowed to carry a gun. Gun is not something that's prohibited. In Canada, we do not allow people to carry guns on their persons. Although we have gun collectors and we have guns at homes, and a lot of our violent crimes are done with handguns, that people have the people that retrieve guns or steal guns from legitimate gun owners, something like 50% we're told, that has to stop. So in order, besides all other measures that we're talking about tightening things at the border, we're talking about no banning handguns. Matter of fact, I even brought the idea of not having any long guns or handguns at home and storing them in a repository, which is a 3-tier repository, and I want to thank the Mayor for writing that to the Prime Minister and saying that we should look at the possibility of storing guns in a repository, and if you want to get your long gun out or your handgun to go target practice, that you go and get it out. But this is not at your home, so people cannot break in and to your house and retrieve it. Madam Speaker, with all those things that we're talking about, I think it's about time that we look holistically. We look at the things that, what are the police divisions doing? What are the social agencies doing? What are other municipalities and their divisions are doing? And then learning from them, come back to Canada and implement them. If New York can do it and take that graph down from 2055 gun shootings down to 900, less than 1,000, I think it's not rocket science. We can do it too. So I commend this motion to you, and hopefully you support it.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion which is an amendment to the notice of motion that I have included in the Mayor's key item. That City Council amend recommendation 1 of that motion by replacing the amount 1.292 million with 0.3 million. So that recommendation now reads as follows. City Council increase the 2019 operating budget in year for social development, finance, and admin to implement year 1 of the Towards Peace program, and so on and so forth. I think it's self-explanatory. While that was the annual cost, in my work with staff in the day before budget to find what would be the perfect and most surgical program so that we could do what we need to do, which is both things. I look at whether or not we invest in police and whether or not we invest in the young people themselves right now as short-term and long-term. Because the reality is I share the experience of Councillor Nunziata. Yes, we know that what Councillor Perk said from that study is absolutely right. You have to invest in poverty reduction and youth themselves to get any kind of change at all. There's no question about that. But the reality is we're now at a point where the problem is so acute in a neighborhood of mine where they've seen 4 major shootings, ones that hit the news in less than 12 months, and the children are now in that complex afraid to sleep in their beds. They sleep on the floor beside their mothers, strapping young men of 14, sleeping on the floor beside their mother's bed because they're afraid that bullets will come through the window. Which means we have to have both strategies. And so that's why I'm moving this. The point 3 is because we're now, we spoke in terms of what the program will cost while we were deciding what would be the best program to recommend to complement this infusion into the police budget. In fact, here we are in October, and so $300,000 is what they need to do the HR startup that will make this program possible. The stats that Councillor Karagiannis showed us are compelling. Heaven knows, they're compelling. The problem is they leave out a whole big chunk of the story. If we go back to the beginning of Mayor Bloomberg's time and on through de Blasio, along with that infusion in police funding came community policing, kind of neighborhood officer and community officer and connected officer, the things in our very own transformation task force that are not the traditional type of policing, but a lot of that was part of the add-in officers. And along with it came the massive investment that went into youth through the school boards that the City Hall controls, through the broken window theory implementation that said that all across the city, when you go into a neighborhood action area, you have to be prepared to take the actions. And so beyond policing, we can look at other charts that show they didn't do it with policing alone. From 2004 to now, there was a partnership between the investment in youth, the investment in the schools because they had control of it, and investment in all of the things that Towards Peace program intends to touch on. And those were done in complement of the massive updating under new leadership of their police service. And so, yes, that's a compelling chart. But if you want to come up with the same chart, you're going to need to do more than just adding to the police budget. Talking about policing in that acute moment in the summer got the ear of the other orders of government for the mayor, and so he was able to get that investment. But if we're going to, every time we have a violent summer, ask other orders of government to bring us, I call them gifts of violence, they're always a sum of money that is temporary. It is either one time or it's 3 years in nature. And what kids need to know, from the first time they're aware of violence in their neighborhood, they need to know what the alternative is, and it needs to be there the whole time they're growing. There needs to be a core that never goes away. A core that when other orders of government want to come and hook in and help us, they can attach to that core and enhance what we are doing. We need to have a core here that we're investing in municipally so that we can tap into it, and when we need to enhance it, we will. And that's what Towards Peace is about. And that's why there are motions about other orders of government. We need more from you. But I actually think that Towards Peace, that can be the core and the complement to all of it, it will be spoken to in that vein when we see the Youth Services Review in 2020. I actually think that what we need is to say that one will always be here for our kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Matlow.
Madam Speaker, I've always seen this issue both through the eyes of being a city councillor, but also as a parent. My daughter is being raised by family that loves her, that she has every opportunity in the world. She has the good fortune of living in one of the safest neighborhoods in Toronto, and she has every opportunity in front of her. And I am so cognizant of the privilege that we have, and I am so grateful for the opportunities that she has. And I want her to have everything. I want her to have the best life she could ever possibly have. And I know that we all feel that way about our kids and the people we love in our lives. And I believe that every child throughout the city should have the same opportunity as my daughter has. But that's just not the case today. And I think about, if we look at policy, should we not look at policy through the same eyes of a parent thinking, how do I both protect my child and how do I contribute to his or her happiness? Well, we have to think logically, and we have to think of every possibility. So enforcement's important. If God forbid anything ever happened to her, I would expect that the police would be there to support us. It's hard to say that, but I know it's true. And I would expect that enforcement be done well and be thoughtful and honest. But I also know that every child should have every opportunity so that they're never in a situation that on the other aspect of enforcement, that they are found with a gun or they are the perpetrator of a crime in the first place. If we look at what's on the table in front of us, if you just look at the evidence, I've seen dozens and dozens of studies that have determined that when it comes to CCTV, they may be helpful with car break-ins, for example, but they do little or nothing when it comes to violent crime. So I would just ask, unless there's a study that I'm unaware of that refutes what all those dozens, if not hundreds of studies, such as the College of Police in England, City University in New York, I could cite so many, then if we have limited funds, just logically, rationally, why would we invest in something that there isn't evidence to support? Why would we do that if we are taking this seriously? I don't understand that fully. What we do know, based on, as Councillor Perks cited correctly, the Roots of Youth Violence report by Alvin Curley and Roy McMurtry, our own staff with the Toronto Youth Equity strategy, they're all telling us the same thing. Invest in these kids early. Do everything you can to reach out to them, provide options and opportunities so they live a happy, healthful, and successful life so that they do not become either the victims of crime or the perpetrators of crime. So we don't need to take pictures of them holding a gun because they never will pick up a gun in the first place. Is that not success, really? Is that not what you'd want for your own child? Moreover, if we really want to invest in things, then look at the youth spaces that I've raised over and over again. It's not my idea. I'm just bringing voice to that idea because we have a dearth of support even in our existing libraries where we have youth congregating because they've got nowhere else to go. And we don't have enough youth spaces throughout the city. But we're not investing in that, and we are investing in cameras that I don't see any evidence that work. I just don't see why we're going in that direction. As was said earlier, we have this debate over and over again. Every time a kid is either the perpetrator of a crime or the victim of a crime, we say we've got to do something, and we ask for more reports, and we try to figure out what to do. The studies have already done, the reports have already been written, we just have to follow their advice. And I believe if we follow their advice, we will end up making the right investments. It's harder to prove a negative than a positive, meaning that we can make announcements about how many police officers we hire. We can make announcements about how many cameras we put up. We can demonstrate to our communities who are living in fear, many, and I get why we need to respond to that we're doing things, and we should be doing things to demonstrate that we recognize their insecurity, which is valid and real. It's harder to prove, for example, that individual that becomes a successful business person or politician or athlete or artist would have otherwise become a criminal or victim of a criminal if we hadn't provided them opportunities in the first place. But in the long term, for the brief moment in time that we are here able to make a difference, let's invest in the next generation, the generation after.
Thank you.
Because that's the difference I believe we all want to make. Thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a brief motion. You have that on the screen. So a week ago, last Tuesday, I was out in the ward in Etobicoke Centre and was looking at some asphalt, looking at a street with staff and some residents. And then I saw the helicopter flying around about 1 kilometer away. And Etobicoke Centre is a pretty quiet place. We don't have helicopters come out that often. Usually it's bad news, and in this case it was bad news. There was a shooting and a fatality at the West Mall in Rathburn. In fact, just a few blocks from Etobicoke Civic Centre where I was a few minutes ago. So I got home and I asked my kids, because school's nearby, if they had gone into lockdown, and they didn't that day. But a couple days later they did a hold and secure exercise at school. And I got to thinking they did a few of those. They actually did a couple of lockdowns the year before because of shootings in the area. I don't know about, I can say most councillors in this chamber, I don't think ever had to go through a hold and secure exercise at school. Maybe there's one or two that might be young enough. We did fire drills, and that was an exciting thing. But my kids, go through a day and age where it's a routine exercise to go and close the drapes and lock the door because something really bad happened in the neighborhood. And so when a helicopter flies over Etobicoke Centre, it really begs a public confidence question. And I think that's the angle I've approached it in the motion I had before you. I realize this is a complex issue and there's a lot of tragedy in gun violence and death. But, I think about what general citizens think about their government, their federal, provincial, municipal, or whether they care about which order it is, and even the police force. And they see these things and they worry about it. So with my motion, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up so far, because the last question from Deputy Mayor Min Wong to Deputy Chief Raymer is, what do you think is needed? And I hope we can be in alignment in saying as a council that we need consequences for people that take these actions. And consequences come in the form of tougher bail conditions so that somebody can't just return to the street after doing something. And tougher sentences. And I don't think it's an ad hoc thing. I mean, I really do believe that's the sentiment of people that I've spoken to, that one piece of the equation before us is making sure that those consequences stay relevant as things change in the city. And, perhaps people will take some care, some sentiment that, maybe a change is afoot when they see helicopters fly or their kids come home and talk about being in lockdown for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
I have a sneeze first. Thank you, Speaker. This is just a really tough debate because some of us have been through this debate so many times. We've been through it so many times, and we still are here debating it. We do have that super important report from Roy McMurtry and others that perhaps has not received the same kind of attention that it needs. And can we say we've implemented that we're portioning out funds both ways, that we're very thoughtful about that? I'm not sure that we can, and that's of concern. I think the list that Councillor Wong-Tam read and said, look at all the things we need to do for youth, including early diversion, including experiences, including getting out of that community, including having alternatives to getting gang involved and gun involved. How well are we doing there? That is what we need to measure. How are we measuring that? Where do we measure that? How do we measure that success? My experience is that we've now put I'm going to speak about TCHC because that's where so many young folks run into situation where they end up gang-related, gun-related, and what types of investments, what kind of strategy, what kind of metrics do we have? How are we engaged to make sure that those aren't pathways? And I do think I'm just talking about your list, pathways to education. That was developed years ago at the Toronto District School Board out of Little Eastdale Collegiate, then it was applied at Regent and other places. It's a very focused approach for youth in order to help them stay in school, be successful, deal with the racism that they're finding in the institutions that they're coming up against and butting up against all the time, to be successful. How well is that doing? Have we invested enough in that? Have we spread that far enough? And this year, we've now investing $9.5 million in new police and in new CSU at TCHC. And when we talk about neighborhood officers, let's be clear. We're talking about neighborhood officers in our TCHC communities. We're not talking about them in my neighborhood or your neighborhood or perhaps your, Councillor Perks right down your street. We're talking about TCHC. So I have an issue with the lack of coordination between all of the law enforcement approaches. And the tenants at TCHC, the board members at TCHC, are kind of concerned that we throw all these officers there. They're worried about racial profiling, getting carded, getting targeted, and I think that we have to listen to them. And the piece that's really missing in my mind is a coordinated approach. I don't think there's a tenant management approach that deals with the difficult tenants. Everybody's now treated the same. Everybody's bad. Where is the tenant management plan? Where is the coordination? I'm extremely frustrated. When I asked the deputy, and I think he gave me a really honest answer, there is nobody sitting in a chair that wakes up every morning that says, where are the difficult communities? How are we connecting with CSU? What's the tenant? There's nobody at TCHC that wakes up every morning that isn't a CSU, that has a management approach, rather than simply we're going out, finding people, arresting them, and then at the end of the day, what are we doing in a broader way for youth? I have a number of letters I'd really like to read to you from a shooting on the weekend, two in the first revitalized community, one on Friday, one on Sunday, and they list all the shootings in that community over and over and over again. We have thrown everything we possibly have. We've tried a lot, but it's very fragmented. There is no overarching plan of tenant management, youth development, and law enforcement that works together in any community, and I think it's our failing.
Thank you. Councillor Ford, I understand you would like to declare a conflict on one of your items?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I could do it now or after this item would be more appropriate, after voting, or?
You can.
And now is fine? Okay, not a problem. So yes, after further consideration or conversation with the Integrity Commissioner, I would just like to declare conflict on page 14 of the agenda, MM 10.5, objection to liquor license phase 2 restaurant 1500 Royal York Road, as I live in a family property in the immediate proximity to the applicant.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. The first item we're going to be voting on is the EX 8.20. First motion is motion 2. Recorded vote.
Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
The motion carries 21-3.
Okay, motion 4 by Councillor Cole. Recorded vote.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Councillor Carroll, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Motion 5. Recorded vote.
Councillor Bradford, please. Councillor Fletcher, your vote, please.
Counselor Cole, please. And Counselor Carroll, please. Counselor Cole, please. Yeah,
The motion carries 23 to 2.
Motion 8. Recorded vote.
Councillor Matlow and Councillor Karygiannis, please.
And Counselor Wong-Tam, please.
The motion carries 22 to 3.
EX 8.20 as amended. Recorded vote.
Counselor Perruzza, please.
It's the item as amended. It's not on this item.
The item is adopted as amended 23 to 2.
EX 8.26. Motion number 1. Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Mayor Tory, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Motion 3. Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton and Councillor Thompson, please.
Counselor Perruzza, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Motion 6. Recorded vote.
Counselor Carroll, please.
The motion carries 24 to 1.
EX 8.26 as amended. Recorded vote.
Councillor Matlow, Councillor Karygiannis, and Councillor Layton, please.
Are we keeping you up, Councillor Fletcher?
Councillor Cole, please.
Oh,
And Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
MM 10.2, motion 7. Recorded vote. Pardon? Which amendment? Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton and Councillor Ainsley, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Okay, item as amended, recorded vote. Yes. We did your bill, by the way, Councillor Carroll.
Councillor Layton and Councillor
Councillor
Cressy.
Fletcher, sorry. Yeah.
Councillor Carroll, please.
The item as amended carries unanimously, 25 in favor.
Page 3, EX 8.3. Councillor Layton, are you ready?
Just to hold down the item until I can get some feedback from senior city staff on the matter. I have a motion that I've sent them that they're about to give me advice on.
Okay, page 3, EX 8.7. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Just to speak, Madam Speaker.
Okay, go ahead.
Are there any questions? Or?
Do you have any questions?
I don't.
Oh, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, Councillor Wong-Tam to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to rise and thank the staff for this report. This is a very important next step to developing a deeper understanding at the City of Toronto on how to bring the experiences of women and girls, non-binary and trans people into the decision-making processes, and also to make sure that when we make decisions that actually will hopefully include their lived experience far better than what we're doing right now. And I want to thank the Mayor for his remarks and his leadership at the Executive Committee, because I think he really just hit the nail on the head in terms of describing what other cities are doing and how that was also a showcase of that leadership, and the City of Toronto is literally following along. But we're not going to be like any other city. We're going to do it our way, and I think that that's really quite encouraging. To develop a gender equity strategy and to eventually build out the gender equality office, maybe we'll start with a unit first, but hopefully one day we will get to that office. We'll have to involve a number of key principles. Although other jurisdictions do drive towards gender equality, they do it slightly differently. And we know that this is not the first time it's been done in other jurisdictions. Whether it's across the country, we have Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, London, and Montreal, all in the pursuit of making sure that women and girls, trans people, and non-binary people are included in their decision making. We also see that American cities are pursuing the same thing. We're trying to place women and girls back onto the urban agenda in cities such as Los Angeles, New York, Boston, and others. And oftentimes they're driven through the leadership of their mayor or perhaps their city manager or their top public servant, but it has to be at the top level of political support. And of course, the gold plate and what we always seen as the best standard of all is in Vienna, Austria, which has actually been in pursuit of gender equality in their city for decades. So we have a long ways to go, but I just want to thank staff for this particular body of work. I want to highlight just three things. Although every jurisdiction is going to do things a little bit differently, one of the staff conclusion is that there's got to be some three fundamental pieces in order to make this work for the City of Toronto. And they've drawn on best practices that you have to incorporate a consultation process that's going to involve the community voices to set the priorities. So we cannot do this for the populations that we want to serve. We've got to do it with their consultation, with their deep engagement in mind. We also need to develop an outcome-based framework. So we need to be able to measure where we're going, and we won't know that if we don't know where we are starting at. So the environmental scan will have to include a very strong disaggregated data collection framework, which I would say the City of Toronto is still struggling to do very well. And this is all about benchmarking and making sure that we can actually measure outcomes at the end of the day. And we won't be able to do that without a very robust and sophisticated data collection process, including a very clear reporting that was going to be framed on accountability and transparency. And finally, there is no solid way of doing this work on promoting gender equality at the City of Toronto unless you can dedicate staff resources to it, which is why it's critically important that we are able to actually hire the technical subject matter experts that we need in order to have them in place to begin this deep dive in 2020. And just to highlight a few things, because I think that it's important for us to grind this and to ground this into some practice. 84% of single-parent households in the City of Toronto, 84% of them are led by women. 60% of transit users are women. They're the majority. Most of the drivers are men. When it comes to populations of who are sitting in the senior category, 65 and older, you have almost 60% that are women. So you end up having people who are more vulnerable, who are road users, who are active transportation users. You're going to have more people who are vulnerable in leading single-family households, which oftentimes means that there are children in those single-led family households, which means that children are impoverished, not just their single parent-led families. And when you take a look at pay equity and the income gaps, we know that 78% of women is what, 78 cents on the male dollar is what women earn. And if you happen to be a racialized Indigenous person, that number quickly decreases. So this is a very important move. I'm very proud that we're doing this, and I'm hoping that we can actually get a good solid vote and make it unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, on the item, recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Bylaw, when you're seated.
The item is adopted unanimously, 19 in favor.
Thank you. Page 3, EX 8.9, Councillor Thompson. Questions?
Speaker, I'd ask for it to be...
Oh, that's tomorrow? Oh, okay. Councillor Carroll is not here. Page 4, EX 8.14, Councillor Perks. Questions, Councillor Perks?
Thank you. To the CFO, I guess, who seems to be just not available yet.
My apologies.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at the operating variance report. I'm looking at page 5. Specifically, I'm concerned with the lower than planned labor costs in municipal licensing and standards. Can you give me a sense why our labor costs are lower than planned in municipal licensing and standards?
Lower labor costs in the municipal licensing and standards.
I'm sorry, through the speaker, Councillor, I was speaking on another matter.
Speaker, I've lost like a minute trying to get to someone who can
Dealing
answer a
with Glen
question.
Roads.
So on page 5 of the
I
operating variance.
started your time over.
Thank you so much.
Anybody have it?
On page 5, it looks, there's a table that looks at the second quarter variance and year-end projection key drivers. And there's 8.8 million net favorable for MLS, and one of the items listed for that is lower than planned labor costs.
Right.
Why do we have lower than planned labor costs?
So through you, Madam Speaker, that has been one of the challenges in MLS on the hiring of MSOs, which represent the largest volume of staff complement. Typically, we hire in a class. It takes we get about 30 to 40 people, and it takes a good chunk of the year to get through the vetting because we have 1,000+ applicants. So it has been a history of running the class and the time it takes to hire the class.
Okay, so given that that's something that we have a history with, and given that I'm pretty sure you could ask any member of this council or any member of the public who's tried to deal with MLS, we have problems providing enforcement to a standard that we approve here at council. What's the plan for making sure that we don't continually have lower than approved complement in enforcement officers at MLS?
So through you, Madam Speaker, I know, certainly the recruitment and expediting the recruitment has been an activity we've undertaken over the last, MLS has undertaken over the last couple of years, looking at opportunities for perpetual postings and smaller classes and more frequent training. I would say, not having them in front of me, unfortunately, I apologize for that. Certainly, I think some of the service levels we do attain, others we do have challenges with. That is not only related to staffing, but also increased volumes in some different call categories. Okay. So it's definitely across the board of different experience.
Well, I've heard you that you're trying things, but as you said, the problem has been going on for years and it persists. Could you undertake to get to me and any other interested member of council a plan for how we're going to make sure this doesn't happen next year?
Yeah, through you, Madam Speaker, happy to do so. I know when we did talk about taking smaller classes, and it takes a fair bit of training time as well, but to certainly find ways to expedite the larger volumes of vacancies we have in the MSO ranks. Happy to do that.
Okay. Going to page 11, I have questions about the TTC, but I don't see anybody here from the TTC. Looking at the approved complement and strength comparisons table, below the table it says a vacancy rate of 4 to 6% is deemed reasonable, and it's projecting a year-end vacancy rate of 13% in corporate services. What's that about? I did email staff my questions.
Yeah, so the corporate services, through the chair, through the speaker, the corporate services 13%. A lot of that is related to capital positions that need to be filled, as well as some frontline positions as well that are currently going through the hiring process.
So I've heard many times, actually, I was just at the library board looking at the capital plan. I've heard that we don't have the staff to deliver capital even if we wanted to. What's the strategy for making sure that we have adequate staff for delivering capital program?
Through the speaker, so those would be specific to the different capital programs that are being delivered. So the skill sets will range and vary depending on the types of positions. In corporate services specifically, there's a lot of capital positions related to construction as well as INT initiatives.
And I appreciate that. What's the plan for making sure that we're not missing a sixth of the workforce?
So as of right now, we're looking at different strategies, comparing benchmarking against industry to see the types of skill sets that we have in-house versus the way we go to market in terms of hiring staff.
Okay. So again, as I asked Deputy City Manager, would someone be willing to provide me for an explanation for what the plan is to make sure that doesn't persist?
We will.
Maybe before the next variance. And then sort of looking at the whole chart, I note that, and this is something I notice every single year, when we get our mid-year vacancy or variance report. The vacancy rate as of the writing of this report was 6%, and it's projected to go down to 3.7. This is corporate-wide. And I notice every single year, in the middle of the year, we're way down positions corporate-wide. Now, we don't approve a whole lot of brand-new positions in the budget cycle, so clearly these are positions we knew we were going to have. Why is it that every year, in mid-year, the vacancy rate is higher than what we considered to be reasonable?
That was your last question?
Corporate-wide.
Through you, Ms. Speaker. Councillor Perks, I think you can appreciate that the budget cycle, the way it has been done in the past, the budget amount is based on a full vacant or a full complement as of January 1st, and the budgets are approved in the spring. So the way we've approached budgeting in the past is something that we're revisiting for 2020.
Thank you. So, Councillor Perks,
Yes.
just release the item?
No, I'm going to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
So I believe it was the year 2008 when I first raised a concern about whether or not we were hiring adequate engineering staff to manage capital projects. We had projects that were being delayed because we didn't have staff in-house. We had developed a practice of not being able to find, because we couldn't find people internally, we would hire contract managers to manage contracts. And then we would run into the problem of if the project fell behind, it's the external contract manager that we've contracted would say it's the contractor's fault, and the contractor would say it's the external contract manager's fault. This is an 11-year problem of us not being able to hire staff with the adequate skill set to be able to manage capital programs. I've asked about it every year. I've asked staff to generate reports on it. I've met with 3 consecutive deputy city managers who manage that program, and I continue to be told we're thinking about it. We have budgets projecting that our state of good repair backlog is going to grow, which means that things are going to be broken and unusable, and that costs us money. We are wasting public money because we just don't solve this problem. And I'm going to turn blue in the face before it gets solved, but I'm willing to do that.
On the item, on favor, carried. Page 4, EX 8.22, Councillor Wong Tam. Do you have questions? Page 4.
I'm just turning to it, Madam Speaker. No, I don't, but I could speak to it.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Okay, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I realize that this is a pass-through request that's coming from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, but I did want to flag this because we had asked for a very similar thing during our last budget process, and that is specifically, just to highlight that, for the divisions who are, to make accommodations for those who are employed in the Toronto Public Service, any type of AODA accommodations, whether it's through technology or perhaps special equipment modifications with desks and equipments, it has to come out of the division's budget. And what that does, Madam Speaker, is that actually builds in an inherent bias for the divisions, whether they know it or not, is that hiring people with a disability means that it will just cost that division a little bit extra. And so, Madam Speaker, what our committee is recommending is that any accommodations for AODA requirements should come out of a global budget, very similar to what City Council has before us. So if we want to draw from the global budget to provide sign language interpretation, to provide some accommodations for our public meetings, we are able to do that without drawing that from our office budgets. So although it did not pass in the 2019 budget, it is our committee's hope our advisory committee's hope that in the 2020 budget is that we're able to set forward a global pot where all the divisions across the City of Toronto can draw from that pot to make sure that their employees are going to be accommodated from that global budget. It's no different, Madam Speaker, than, for example, if you have someone who needs to go on maternity or paternity leave, and that division had to pay specifically for those extra dollars. That would be grossly unfair. It would also disadvantage anybody who wanted to have children. And that's kind of the system that's been set up at the City of Toronto at the moment, where the divisions would have to take out of their own divisional office budgets, their own divisional budgets, to provide accommodations. And so for the employees in the Toronto Public Service, they have raised this concern with our committee, and our committee is once again tabling this and hoping that through the 2020 budget process that we can make the right move, and a move that is actually being backed by through the AODA, and a move that actually sits and embedded in the Ontario Human Rights Commission around a policy based on ableism and discrimination based on disability. It's a section 9.3, minimizing undue hardship. So this is actually based on human rights law. It's based on AODA accommodation in this legislation, and we're really hoping that in the 2020 budget we make this fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On the item, all in favor? Carried. Page 5. Okay, Councillor Carroll is not here. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher? I just want to remind members of council, if you've held items down, it would be greatly appreciated if you're sitting at your seat. Well, no problem with sitting in your seat. Councillor Perks, page 5. EC 7.10. Do you have questions, Councillor Perks?
No. I don't know if anyone else
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Just a sec, please. Did you have questions?
This is the coroner's recommendation. Any questions? No? Okay, Councillor Perks to speak.
I won't take much time, Speaker. I'd hope to be able to talk to staff a little bit more, but as I said, we're going through these items very quickly. I encourage every member of council to read these reports. They're about the kinds of gaps that we have as a city and the services we deliver that result in people dying in the worst circumstances you can imagine. There are many, many recommendations here. Many of them are for other orders of government, but there are several that are specific for the City of Toronto. And if I could sum them up in just one phrase, it's that our housing and social support net is frayed and people are falling through and dying. And I am hoping that all of us, particularly city staff, as they prepare our 2020 budget, have given these a very good read. I do not want to continue to sit on a council where we let people die in alleys because we're not doing our job. And I just felt it was important to say that. It's quite harrowing reading these reports. And right across the public service, all the different services that we deliver have a role to play here, and we need to be mindful of that. We should not, in one of the best places to live in the world, at one of the wealthiest times in human history, ever have these kinds of problems in front of us.
On the item, on favor? Carried.
No, I wasn't.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you, Councillor Perks. It's Councillor Fletcher. Yeah. Councillor Fletcher, do you have any questions?
No, Speaker. I had them answered, actually. Mr. Patchlock and Mr. Jessup came up to the members' lounge with me earlier. and Mr. Patchlock was kind enough to explain to me about this sole source and how and why and under what circumstances the city would be sole sourcing contracts. So this is a sole source called non-competitive agreement, but I understand why it has to be done. I also understand there's very strict rules around moving to a non-competitive environment, and I'm satisfied here, so I can simply move that.
Okay, thank you. On the item, this is on page 5, EC 7.2. All in favor? Carried. So we're moving along quite quickly here. Page. Pardon? Yeah, but the first one is, the first one is Councillor Holiday. Councillor Holiday.
Payday loans.
Page 6.
Thank you, I have no questions, Madam Speaker, unless somebody else does.
Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, Councillor Holiday.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion, and I will explain to members what this is. So at Government and Licensing Committee, committee replaced a number of recommendations from staff. Those recommendations effectively said that the city will no longer issue licenses for payday loans. That was very similar to what the staff were providing. However, this particular motion was deleted. This particular motion was part of the staff recommendations, and I would like to re-add it. I believe it will not change the spirit of the outcome of the committee's recommendations. All it simply does is allow for the fees to escalate over time that are charged to the payday loans. I think it was just an oversight of the committee that we didn't catch that this piece was missing. Although I had some concerns with the way that we arrived at the policy outcome of the committee, I believe that the general intent of the policy is still there before us, and would urge members to support the addition of the original staff recommendation, which is recommendation number 4, if you have the report in front of you. This motion was lifted directly from it and is something that is needed to correct it. Other than that, I will be voting against one of the items, this is personally, where we call upon the province to set a cap on the interest rate of payday loan establishments of 30%. That was a recommendation of the committee, not a staff recommendation. I will put to members of council that although I harbor great concerns, as many people do, with the way that payday loan establishments provide services and how expensive the interest rates are, I do believe that a fixed interest rate as suggested by the committee is something that would cease the operation of the payday loans if it happened. And I would give the thought experiment of if those establishments were to close, it doesn't get rid of the need of some people to get short-term loans, low-value loans, and the fear is that people would then turn to the underground or unregulated places to get that type of money, and I'm not sure if we are acting in the best interest that way. So I'm going to ask to vote on that particular item separately, and I do hope council supports the re-addition of this particular element because I think it's important and was missed from the recommendations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would encourage all members of council to vote in support of the recommendations coming from committee. They were largely informed by way of a combination of the staff report, but also I think very strong amendments that came from members of ACORN. A organization has been around for a number of years that specifically worked to support members that are low income across the city. And they do so, Madam Speaker, is because they know that the low income members and residents across the city are unduly targeted by payday lenders. And these predatory lenders go into neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that are low income, and they create an ecosystem and a chain of them that sort of wrap around each other in neighborhoods that sort of force individuals who are living check to check and who are working precarious wages, who need to make ends meet, but they're also charged exorbitant fees, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, if you recall, it's your own leadership going back in the early 2010 or 2012 that was asking for almost a decade now, almost a decade of advocacy to try to regulate and provide minimum requirements on how these businesses should perform. And then in 2016, Madam Speaker, you and I teamed up again, and we said we wanted to see action on a staff report that was nowhere to be found. So this community has been waiting a very long time. And I think that it's actually it's important for us to recognize is that a decade has almost gone by since their work has, since they've been advocating for some of these changes around minimum separation distances, around caps on a number of them, so you don't necessarily allow them to create the ecosystem that they want to create, which allows someone to go to one payday lender, extract a high interest loan, and then go to another one just about 25 meters away and take out a second loan to pay the first loan, and then they walk up the street another 25 meters again, and they go get a third loan to pay back the second loan, and they're still out of pocket for the first loan. You are confining people into a web of debt forever. And we have the ability to do something about that right now. So obviously there's a responsibility here at the City of Toronto. We should take forceful action because we need to protect low-income, vulnerable communities. But let's also take a look at the structural system that actually keeps them where they are and why they are relying on these predatory lenders. Banks across the country do not want to lend to a number of people. They consider them credit not worthy based on the criteria that they've set up. But it's actually government and government legislation that gives the power to the bank to make these loans. They don't do it on their own without government legislation. So there is a role here, Madam Speaker, for the federal government to step in to mandate that federally regulated banks, credit unions, and financial institution services should provide low-interest loans to these individuals because they are making record profits year after year and offsetting the balance sheet, Madam Speaker. They should be able to provide low-income low-interest loans to low-income individuals so that everybody in this country, regardless of where they are, has access and equitable access to some form of credit. And Madam Speaker, the other thing is that the province has a role to play. So the city needs to do its part, the federal government needs to do its part, but the province has a role to play. And if we don't pick a number to determine where the caps are for the interest rate, I will tell you, Madam Speaker, the lobby that actually that's advocating for these predatory lenders and payday lenders, they will tell you that it's not enough, that the risk is too high. They need to offset their business losses in case someone defaults on their loans. And Madam Speaker, that would be the wrong way to go. So we should set a standard, even if what we do is make the request, which is why I think we need to adopt the recommendations coming from committee and let the province determine and respond to what we ask for. Not necessarily saying, we don't want to set the standard, let the province do it. We're making the request. The province can always say no, but we draw a line in the sand based on consultation and engagement with the community most harmed on a regular basis, and that's by our way how we stand up for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
I want to thank Councillors Wong Tam and Nunziata, along with Councillor Prutza, for their leadership on an issue that is so clearly in the public interest. We heard over and over and over again stories of how people's lives were ruined, leading to depression, broken families, even suicide, because they were victims of these predatory, parasitical payday lenders that take advantage of these people's lives in such horrendous ways. People that can never escape the vicious cycle that they get into because they can never get out of having to pay off these debts. And in fact, the way, when these, we heard so many stories of when these payday lenders are, congregate into one area, people will go from one and then to the next and then to the next. And the burden of debt just keeps building up and up and up. That is their existence. And they will never get out of that. And you don't see them in areas that are becoming gentrified. I can tell you, I've seen strips like St. Clair West and other areas where there used to be more. And as the areas gentrify, they go, okay, we want to go after other vulnerable people. We want to target neighborhoods where people are poorer and more vulnerable to their exploits. That's what they do. They're predators, preying on people. And we have to squeeze them like they've squeezed so many of the people who we represent. We need to get them out of here. And I just hope that by moving forward with the restrictions that we're putting on them, by the requests that we're asking of the other orders of government to support us, by reining in these excessive interest payments that they demand and are allowed to demand, that we as a Toronto Council are telling payday lenders that if your business is all about exploiting people, then we don't support you doing business in the City of Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to urge members of council to support the recommendations coming out of the committee. We had a very thorough and thoughtful discussion, a very good debate, and we were very much guided by the experience of councillors such as yourself, Madam Speaker, who for a very long time have been advocating for those who are victims of payday loans and trying to bring in measures to improve that situation. And so I think we came up with an excellent set of recommendations. They were very thoroughly discussed. They were adopted almost unanimously, and I think we have a very excellent set of recommendations here before council, which should be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza.
Speaker, I have a series of motions, and the desk has them. I don't know if they have them ready yet.
No, they don't have it ready.
Can we just stand it down then for a
So-
second until they are?
Are the series of motions different? Are they different? They're different than the committee reports? Well, okay, no, they're not ready. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher? Well, they're not ready. He just gave them to the staff 2 minutes ago. So we're going to go to your item IE 7.7, page 6.
Yeah, I did try to release that earlier, but
Yes.
you have made me wait. Sorry. So yes, I'm going to just release that and again say that I've had Mr. Patchlock come down to really talk about what a sole source is and under what circumstances we would sole source something, what a non-competitive contract is. So I understand we're exempting the provider, we're exempting Parks Department from RFP requirement, and this non-competitive contract would be awarded, and I'll move that, Speaker.
Okay, on the item, page 6, IE 7.7. On favor? Carried. Page 7, IE 7.9. Councillor Fillion, do you have any questions?
Sorry, which one, Madam Speaker?
Page 7, top of page 7. Number of
Yes,
tickets
I-
issued?
if we could hold this down to tomorrow, legal is looking into something for me. I told them I thought it would be coming up tomorrow morning.
Well, we're
I also
going through the
have a
agenda
motion.
fast, so this is
I know,
like
but no
a,
one expected us to go this fast.
well,
Madam
it's a
Speaker.
record.
And I also have a motion which I haven't given to the clerk yet.
All right. Page 7, IE 7.13, Counselor Pasternak, are you ready? This
ma'am.
is on the e-scooter, scooter
Yes,
oversight
thank
management.
you.
Do you have questions to staff?
Questions for staff?
Okay, questions to staff.
Great, thank you. So just to provide, we have staff here? Where's transportation?
Okay, we need transportation staff.
Wish we had more counselors.
Sorry, through you, Madam Speaker. We are getting to items rather quickly. I think we're catching staff off guard.
Oh, are you?
I'm here, but certainly we're reaching out to get our transportation colleagues down here.
Should we hold it down, or should I just
Well-
ask away? I don't know.
Think,
We try. So,
ask? Okay, they're ready. I mean, the whole idea is to get through the agenda,
no,
so,
we
you know.
we on the floor are ready.
Okay. Like, if we can get council agenda complete, it's be amazing, our record.
So my first questions are very
Councilor
broad.
Pasternak.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, why don't we give this a try, and let's see how we go. So I just want to lay the groundwork for the legal framework on what we're working with. Now, the province, the Ministry of Transportation, has changed the regulations to allow e-scootering, or at least allow municipalities to develop a local framework to make it legal.
So through you, Madam Speaker, my understanding is that the Province of Ontario is amending the Highway Traffic Act for the purposes of allowing e-scooters on a pilot basis. I believe it's a 5-year pilot. At the same time, we are talking about what mechanisms necessary the municipality would have to deal with particularly commercial operators of e-scooters, where we run the risk of seeing a proliferation on our public right-of-way.
So the province is amending the Highway Traffic Act, making e-scooters legal, but it's the municipalities that develop the local regulatory framework on the rules they have to operate under. Is that?
So through you, Madam Speaker, the HTA governs the conduct on the roadways. I believe the staff, and once they get here, they are on their way down, can speak to whether or not we're implementing anything from a policy perspective for a personal scooter being used in cycle lanes. I'll have to defer to them on that. But certainly our interest is in the commercial operations of e-scooters, as we've seen in many other, there's transportation, Barbara running, as we've seen in many other jurisdictions where they've happened. There is a concern for us about commercial operators allowing the e-scooters to be left on the public right-of-way and obstructing sidewalks. That's where the municipal role absolutely is critical. And Barbara may be able to answer the question in respect to any other additional municipal regulations required beyond the HTA and us needing to regulate commercial operators.
Yes. Madam Speaker, did you want to reset my time, or what did you want to do?
I can be seen. I'm happy to carry on. Other municipal requirements for e-scooters, certainly.
Well, I have some specific questions. So we just covered off the broad strokes, but when it comes to the power of the municipality, the province has said the maximum operating speed is 32 kilometers an hour. Can the municipality cap that at, let's say, 20?
Through the Speaker, so the province is still in the process of crafting their response back. So at this point, while there have been there's been initial statements about speed, and there's been initial statements about how they're going to kind of navigate the rules, they have not actually come back to us with the formal proclamation of what they're going to do. We believe it will be a 5-year pilot. We have, as you know, sent back recommendations, and I think we circulated them, about having a lower speed so that we can manage some of the safety issues that we've seen in other jurisdictions. Our interest is in having e-scooters, if and when they get deployed in Toronto, to be speed compatible with cycling, because they would likely be sharing the cycling facilities.
So right now, we don't know what powers we might have in regulating the industry once it becomes local. In other words, we don't know whether we could cap the speed limits. We don't know whether we can make helmets mandatory. And we don't know, well, we certainly will have the power on where they can be parked. Is that,
Through the speaker, certainly, if the province does choose to set restrictions of that type and does require cities to follow those restrictions, we would certainly be held to that standard. Many other locations have had local control in terms of defining what kind of rules and regulations they can apply, and we're hopeful that we can have that control so that we can create a program that's going to work for Toronto.
so that's an important point. So we can do a Made in Toronto regulatory framework based on amendments to the Highway Traffic Act. They will delegate to us the minutia to make it accessible, safe, operational.
Through the speaker, what they come back with in terms of the regulatory environment or the framework for this pilot that they want to move forward, once we have that back, we will have a lot more information about how we can operate and what our role as a city is going to be. Based on what we've learned from other jurisdictions, and we've done some pretty extensive research, the best and most straightforward programs do have very specific local rules, and typically through the type of a pilot or a permit that dictate very clear standards between a commercial operator and the city.
Now, I guess one of the concerns about e-scooters is personal injury. Has there been any attempt by the e-scooter companies to combine us with any lawsuits? In other words, make us partially liable for any kind of road maintenance issues that may have been?
That was your last question?
Oh, I'm the chair of the committee. I should get it.
Yeah, so you still get 5 minutes.
Yeah, equality, that's right. No special preferences, Pasternak.
With regard to what the restrictions or obligations of the private company will be, I don't know the answer to that question. Certainly, individual people who get hurt within the public right-of-way will have the same rights that they have with any other kind of crash related to coming back to the city and asking for some type of legal compensation. The question was about.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley, questions?
I thought Councillor Perks was in front. Doesn't matter. Yeah, fine. Sorry, I wanted to ask, so there was a letter from September 12th that was sent to the provincial government. Have we had a response? I don't know who's answering either.
Through the speaker, the letter that our response that was sent to the MTO, we distributed to, I believe, did you get a copy of that?
Yep. So this is the letter of September 12th. It was our submission to the province.
That is correct. And we have not yet heard back from the MTO on how they're going to proceed.
Okay. Did they say they're going to respond at all, or this was just we sent this in?
They will, likely they will just announce the regulation, but we don't have a sense as to what the timing is on that.
Okay, because there seems to be a number of items in the letter where we differ from the province around, they want a 5-year pilot project, we want a 2-year pilot project. One of the other concerns I guess I have is around indemnification. A lot of the reading I've read around, I'll use Bird for example. This seems to be one of the largest e-scooter operators around the world. They seem to operate around, the common complaint I see around indemnification is they operate on an ironclad waiver that people have to sign. So the municipality, it all seems to fall back on the municipality.
And all of those items would have to be worked out in a situation where we had a permit or a pilot program where we had a relationship actually with an operator.
Okay. And so I guess the first recommendation, it says that this is going to come back in the fourth quarter of 2019. So at that point, are you expecting to have a response back from this letter from the province and then taking feedback or motions from this motion, this meeting to move forward to the next phase?
So we are anticipating, although we don't know for sure when the province is going to come back with the regulation, as I mentioned. We are putting together kind of the parameters for what we see as a programmatic approach to engaging with a commercial operator around e-scooters, and we're looking to have that back to council by the December timeframe.
Okay, because I guess one of the concerns I have is around infrastructure. where these e-scooters can go anywhere from 24 to, we're recommending 32 kilometers.
So just to be clear, our interest is in having speeds that are compatible with cycling. We're certainly aware of and looking into issues related to safety and accessibility and other components. So we want to make sure that whatever program does move forward for Toronto, it's one that we've presented thoroughly to this council and we've vetted, and it will be successful.
Okay, because one of the articles I was reading about Bird, I think in New York City or Bird worldwide has a program called Save Our Sidewalk, where they make a commitment to send in the municipality $1 per day for every vehicle, $1 per day per vehicle that's used, and that money's put towards improving cycling infrastructure. Is that something that we could look at?
We have heard about many different types of schemes between the commercial operators and the cities in which they operate, and so these would all be issues we'd be looking into, and again, would bring kind of a range of things back to you in December.
Okay, all right. And then I guess my last question was around helmets. And tourists seem to really like e-scooters. They don't not wearing helmets though, which seems to cause the greatest amount of injuries from the reading I've done. Is that something we'll be looking at doing, how we incorporate the ability for people to wear helmets or should be wearing helmets, or how they get access to helmets?
We've been having discussions about helmets and the mandatory use of helmets with MTO staff. We currently do not have a mandatory helmet law in the city of Toronto, and so that would be something new that we would have to take action on.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Councillor Perks, question?
Thank you. In the proposed bylaw here, there are a series of provisions that, you can't litter the sidewalks with them, ride them on sidewalks, and so on and so forth. My bet would be that the person that we would be holding culpable would be the person riding the scooter.
Through the speaker, I think there's a couple of different models there. One is that there's a structured enough engagement with the commercial operator that we have enough data to be able to track the location of those and have an agreement about how we settle issues related to the improper placement of the vehicles on the sidewalk. There's different things during the day. Sometimes it's just the use, which might be by an individual person. If we are clear about how we mark out places where scooters
I'm just talking about the current bylaw that's here, not the plan down the road.
There's not a bylaw yet.
The current proposal we have in front of us.
The current proposal that we have.
Says to make it illegal to ride them on the sidewalk, so on and so forth.
Correct.
There's nothing in that would allow us to hold any scooter company that just showed up and started renting them culpable.
Correct. Then it would be the user in the current description that we have now.
Okay. So this may be for somebody else, I don't know, but clearly we're going to have to be developing some regulatory framework to manage this. Is part of our thinking in that how to hold firms culpable for problems caused using our already inadequate transportation infrastructure.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Speaker, I would expect as transportation and municipal licensing or standards are talking about the issue about commercial operation, that a consideration to holding the platform and the supplier of the e-scooters would certainly be part of that regulatory framework.
And do you think we will do better with managing that framework than we did, say, with private transportation companies?
Through you, Madam Speaker, somehow I knew that was the question that was going to be asked, Councillor Perks. Quite frankly, I think we've done quite a fine job at regulating the private transportation companies operating in the city, and I would expect an equally successful regulatory framework, if necessary and appropriate, to address e-scooters.
Will you get points for style?
Thank you. To speak, Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I come home from work and my millennial kids greet me who have moved back into the house, they ask me, "What have you banned today?" And I'm not really quite sure how to answer that, but that was the response. We banned guns today, handguns today. So with this, this was extremely popular among their peer groups. But I had an opportunity. I was in Denver this summer at a conference, and Denver is scooter city. And I saw firsthand, first of all, accentuate the positive, people getting around easily, having lots of fun. It was great to see the cyclists, the scooters, people jogging. It's just a beautiful city to see this kind of outdoor activity. At the same time, I saw the negative side of it, and many of these scooters were blocking the public right-of-way. They were tipped over on the sidewalks. They were impeding the easy access to buildings, and there was actually a lot of problems with that. And many people who are seniors, who have mobility issues, who are disabled would certainly find the piles of scooters that we saw in Denver very intimidating and just downright rude. So what we're trying to do here in the City of Toronto, through our committee, through council, is to get it right. Is to make sure that we go slow, to make sure that we take all the precautions we can to ensure that people can have easy access to a fun, inexpensive way of travel, and at the same time make sure that they are not blocking the public right-of-way, they are not impeding the ability of seniors and others with mobility issues, and actually it would block anyone with the scooters tipped over on the sidewalk. At the same time, many cities who have introduced scooters have seen a spike in personal injury. And when you've never been on one, and I've only been on one recently, and you're not sure on the controls, the braking system, putting on the gas and the pressure and dismounting and so forth, and if you're running it on rough terrain, you have a high expectation that you could get into an accident if you're not careful. And I've read in various media reports about the personal injuries that have occurred. So at the same time, while some of the motions that were moved by committee and slightly amended by Councillor Layton, I believe he's going to be speaking as a mention, he has a motion shortly. While it may seem draconian, it is better for us to make sure that we get this right, that we introduce e-scooters to our city, but at the same time we make sure that people understand the rules of the road, that we're respecting the public right-of-way, that we're making sure that we reduce the number of injuries, but at the same time offer a cheap, inexpensive, and effective way to get that last mile, to get around short distances, and to have fun at the same time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Layton. No, you're here to, you put your name to speak. Oh. Councillor Perks.
Oh, thank you very much. So, Speaker, I could go out canvassing every night for the rest of my life and ask somebody, do you think the City of Toronto provides adequate transportation services right now in terms of the use of the road space? Do we do it safely? And I would never find a person who says the way we use our right-of-way right now is safe. It's not safe because we already have too many conflicts and not enough infrastructure to support the most vulnerable people using the transportation system, pedestrians and cyclists. And here we are on the verge of adding yet another mode onto that already over-demanded right-of-way, putting yet another vulnerable user in there to mix into an inadequate transportation infrastructure. If I was standing here today and we had the minimum grid of fully separated bike lanes that cycling activists have been asking for us, if I was standing here today and we weren't experiencing record numbers of pedestrian fatalities in City of Toronto streets, if I was standing here today and I knew I had the resources to implement Vision Zero to the satisfaction of all Torontonians, I might turn my mind to opening up city streets to e-scooters. But no, we're nowhere near any of that. What is happening here is the same thing that happened with Uber, it's the same thing that happened with Airbnb, it's the same thing that happens whenever some large group of venture capitalists figure out, aha, I have a way to make some money off public infrastructure, and damn the consequences. I have absolutely zero tolerance, patience, or willingness to take an already dangerous city street and make it more dangerous so that a venture capitalist who's invested in an e-scooter company makes more money. If city staff can show me that they have a way to hold those venture capitalists to account for any consequence they create in our transportation network, maybe I'd be a little bit more open to it. But I know from long, bitter experience that those guys write the rules. The rules that govern taxi drivers right now are weaker than they were before Uber came in. The guarantees we provide to people who are riding in a taxi, not even an Uber, are not as good as they used to be. This is part of a downward spiral which is all about letting people make more money off inadequate public infrastructure. And I don't believe for a minute we're going to find the legal tools to protect Torontonians. If you believe in Vision Zero, this is actually moving away from Vision Zero. This is making the circumstances worse. So I'll wait for the staff report, but I will be astonished if I find that what we're proposing here makes the City of Toronto safer to travel in. And the other thing is, please be aware that just like Uber, we're not going to be taking cars off the street when this comes in. We're going to be replacing transit, cycling, and walking trips with something that's electrically powered. Electricity does not come with no environmental or social cost. It's actually something we should be reducing the use of. So using electricity to replace transit, walking, and cycling trips has no real benefit to the larger society. And as much as Councillor Pasternak's kids will feel that we are killjoys, that's much better than having more people killed on City of Toronto streets.
Councillor Ainsley?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I outlined a number of concerns that I had around e-scooters. I've done a lot of reading about e-scooters and municipalities around the world. For me, it basically boils down to adventure versus safety. E-scooters look really neat. They're a lot of fun. I've seen videos of them. And then we have a letter that we wrote to the province outlining our concerns. And when you look at safety issues, and they use the example of 2 UCLA hospitals in 2019, falls accounted for 80% of injuries by e-scooter riders. Common injuries included head 40%, fractures 32%, contusions, sprains, lacerations. And these are injuries not just common to Los Angeles. In every city that e-scooters have been put in around the world, these are consistent injuries. You're talking about getting on an e-scooter that often without a helmet. Tourists use them a lot because they love them. They're cheap to use. But they do it without helmets. So you have these injuries all the time. You can Google e-scooters and municipalities. You will not find one article that says what a great thing e-scooters are that came to our city. Just this morning in the Globe and Mail, there's a half-page article, and it's entitled, What Canada Can Expect After Berlin's Rocky Scooter Rollout. When we talk about rolling this program out slowly and safely, Berlin, who's had e-scooters for just under 6 months, their initial allotment by the first company was 200 scooters. Here we are 6 months later, they have over 6,000 scooters on the streets of Berlin. So it was hardly a safe, slow, methodical rollout. We often hear of injuries with people in our bike lanes, streets without bike lanes. Throw in a mix, Berlin's the same size as the city of Toronto, roughly. Throw in 6,000 e-scooters into that mix as well. So I think we do have a lot of issues that we need to look at. I mentioned indemnification. A number of the scooter companies, they're all very good at making sure any indemnification and legal issues don't fall on their doorstep. They fall on the host municipality. As I mentioned, safety issues around helmets. Bird, for example, one of the larger companies had so much trouble in New York City trying to roll out a scooter program or talking about rolling out a scooter program. They actually created this Save Our Sidewalk program where they allot $1 per day per e-scooter that gets rented out. Maybe that's something we should be looking here in the city as we try and improve our infrastructure program. I look forward to the report in the next quarter of 2019, but once again, this is all about adventure versus safety. As a municipality, you want to make sure your residents are having fun and tourists are enjoying the city, but we also have a very strong obligation to ensure that the safety of our residents and people on our streets is maintained. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton, are you ready?
It was just deleting the second half of the motion.
Oh, hold on, they're not ready.
Okay.
Do you have a motion?
Wonderful. As I knew that clerks would. Please disregard my previous comment that city solicitors were more difficult to work with around words than city clerks.
She's ignoring you.
Hey, Councillor Layton, your time is running.
My motion's up on the screen,
Okay.
and that is to amend the Infrastructure Environment Committee recommendation by adding the words "until such time as the report in recommendation 1 above can be considered by the appropriate committee." I'll explain that in a second. First, like, this technology is springing up all over the city, and we have an opportunity right now. Unlike the situation with Uber and Airbnb, we have an opportunity right now to have a dialogue, to do our research in advance of the commercialization of this technology and potentially of public space. Now, I know many of you probably wouldn't have struggled with this on a regular basis, but even citing our own cycling infrastructure is not without contention in neighborhoods. There is only so much space on the public right-of-way to accommodate the widespread commercialization of a technology like this. And when you look at pictures, as I've heard Councillor Ainsley has, and I know the rest of you have received emails about how these things are stored in the right-of-way of other municipalities, that it raises some concerns, certainly for me. I'm concerned about the safety on the streets. That is partially a responsibility of the province, although I don't hold much faith that they'll get it right. They are responsible for it. But then we're going to have our consideration after they do their due diligence. At committee, I amended the motion to ensure that staff were discussing the issue of right-of-way management within the public right-of-way where these vehicles are stored with the Toronto Parking Authority. And I did that very deliberately. Part of it is I see this as a micro-mobility extension of our bike share program. My first choice would be not to open our market up to the private sector, instead to incorporate that technology into our existing fleet for a number of reasons. One, I think we'd do well. I think we'd make money. And two is the demands that I've seen for space in our right-of-way cannot facilitate multiple operators in this space, or else we will not have any space for patios, we will not have any space for parking meters, we will not have any space for our bike share facilities. The reality is, where these vehicles want to go is in the downtown core, and we are tapped out for space. There is, though, a way to integrate this into our existing system that has the added benefit of securing the vehicles in space that protect the public right-of-way. They should be docked. They should be docked where there are docks, and potentially a hybrid system that allows them elsewhere outside of the core. But it's going to cost them money because it's going to cost the municipality money. And I revised the motion at committee to ensure that staff were considering this. I had revised this motion here because it's important for us to send an indicator that we're not closing the door, that we're waiting for the province to do their work and we're doing our due diligence in the meantime so that we can come up with a program that ensures people are safe, not only when riding the e-scooters or those that are around the e-scooters, but how these e-scooters are stored. And I think those are two very important things that we need to address. And I look forward to having the debate with all of you when it comes back from staff. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have questions for you, Councillor Karygiannis. 3 minutes clarification of the
Thank you,
motion.
Madam Speaker. If I can have the motion up again, I'll appreciate it. Councillor, you're asking that we prohibit the use of e-scooters on the city sidewalks. Now, these are companies that are trying to come in for us to use them, but there's individuals that are using these e-scooters. They've got skateboards that are electric. They've got unicycles that are electric. How are we going to be allowing for that for the next until we see the report back?
Well, first of all, the recommendation.
Councillor, I'm going to put your time on hold. The motion that Councillor Layton moved, what you're referring to is part of the committee report. Councillor Layton's amendment is only what's underlined.
Right, Madam Speaker.
So that's his amendment. That's his amendment.
It states, City Council prohibit the use of e-scooters.
No, but that's part of the report. His motion is
All right, thank you,
only
Madam Speaker.
the underlying part of the amendment.
That came from committee. I would like to add, though, if you know where to get an electric unicycle, I would actually love to know. That sounds pretty cool. On a unicycle?
Councillor Perks, question to Councillor Layton.
Really?
Thank you. Councillor Layton. So, if I understand the difference between the advice that came from committee and what you are moving, the advice from committee is put in this bylaw and then report back, and if they have, a different way they want to do it, we amend the bylaw then. If I read what yours does, it says the minute a report lands at committee, the bylaw is lifted.
No, so the intent is just to signal.
Your motion doesn't say send a signal. Your motion says when, can I have it back up? Until such time as the report and recommendation can be considered by the appropriate committee and city council. So that doesn't say we actually change anything or come up with a new regulatory framework. It just says once it's been here, then automatically the prohibition is waived.
No, well, it doesn't say to repeal the bylaws, or it doesn't provide a sunset clause on the bylaw. What it says is prohibit the use of e-scooters until we use it.
That was
this intent.
Until such time as council has considered it, there is a prohibition. So logically, that says once council has considered it, there is no longer a prohibition.
It doesn't, though, because I think it's the third part of the motion that has the indication that we should enact bylaws. It doesn't in this case. I don't say repeal the bylaws. Certainly, the intent isn't to automatically remove the existing bylaws, and I'd get some clarification from the solicitor.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Councillor Layton and I are having a little bit of lack of clarity here. My understanding is, under the procedure bylaw, if council is not sure what the effect of something is, it can ask for advice of the clerk. My reading of this is the way Councillor Layton has written it, that once something comes to council, irrespective of what council decides to do, the bylaw prohibition that we're considering will be waived. Councillor Layton has a different understanding and intended something different Could we get advice from the clerk so that we understand what it is we're voting on?
Yes, yes. If I can have the clerk, because I think there is a bit of a confusion here.
Yeah.
You can figure out how.
So,
No, we want to get the prohibition passed today. Start coming on. Yeah. Well, I need to understand the effect of Mike's motion. If it's fine, then we vote for it. If not, we vote against it. And then we
okay,
vote for
Councillor Perks.
Yes, please.
The difficulty is that the intention is to put in place a temporary regulation that prohibits the use of these scooters. The wording that until such time as it comes back to committee and council, you're right, implies that, you know, it's going to be repealed at that point. That I do not think that is what Councillor Layton intended.
No.
So,
So-
Speaker, I'm in your hands.
We
I
will
think that
need
if the
legal
motion
to
doesn't
help
reflect the-
redraft.
So why don't you then hold your
To be honest,
down and we'll get city solicitor.
if I could, on a point of order, to be honest, I'm not particularly passionately moving this motion that will really have no effect except for send a signal that at some point in time in the near future, we will reconsider this and perhaps lift some of these restrictions. So I'll gladly, with that being said, withdraw the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
You could redraft it if you wanna figure
Councillor
it out. I just,
Holiday, he withdrew his motion. Okay. On favor? Carried. Thanks.
you can't.
Councillor Cole.
So I'm speaking to the committee recommendation, right? The motion?
Yes.
Yeah, because like Councillor Perks said, there's a need for clarity here. I just support the committee recommendation, and I really urge members of council, as Councillor Ainsley mentioned, this is a precarious, no pun intended, road we're going down, because, you know, our transportation department and the residents of Toronto have got their hands full in terms of being able to navigate the streets and the sidewalks of Toronto. So whatever we do, we just got to make sure that we take that into account. I mean, right now, I'm sure the number one call I'm getting in my office for the last 5 months, besides the shooting calls, has been the ones about traffic. So that they feel that there's too much speeding, there's too many cement trucks, there's too many unsafe intersections, they want crossing guards, the school safety zones aren't safe. So I just think that's what's got to be paramount here, is because I don't think that the city and the residents can handle any more jeopardy, any more uncertainty in trying to just walk down the street or trying to cross the street, or never mind trying to drive. So that's why I support the staff recommendation, and we've got to be very, very cautious. I think Councillor Pasternak voiced the same opinion. So let's really think of the people who are right now really stressed out about doing things that they thought were routine, walking down the street to get a bag of apples. Now you can't do that without risking your life.
Okay. No, so there's no motion, so we're on the item. On favor? Carried. Yeah. Councillor Holiday, I understand that you're withdrawing your motion on the payday loans? Okay, so on favor of allowing Councillor Holiday to withdraw his amendment, on favor, carried. Do we have Councillor Peruzza's motions ready?
Here we go. Oops.
So Speaker, there they are. It's just, you know, in part as an add-on, adding on some literature to one of the recommendations where we endeavor to educate people about, you know, some of the perils of high interest and some counseling around, you know, some folks' financial options. It adds a recommendation just simply asking the federal government, along with some of the other asks, to also engage partners such as credit unions in providing some of these services to our residents. There's a third motion, which is a standalone, which asks our Executive Director of Social Development, Finance and Administration to engage partners such as credit unions and so on in trying to leverage some of the services that they might be able to provide to Torontonians in trying to also diminish some of the perils of payday loan type loans. And there's a motion there that basically seeks to have the City of Toronto prohibit payday loan establishments, cash for gold vendors, and pawn shops and so on from advertising on city property. I'll speak to those in just a second, Speaker. And I just want to basically, you know, outline why are we doing this? Why are we going out and saying, and we want to more rigorously regulate these folks? Well, it's simple. You know, someone comes in for an installment loan, and the criminal rate of interest is 60%. So these payday loan establishments are able to charge somebody in the neighborhood of 60% interest on an installment loan. When you look at payday loans, for example, and $15 per $100, you translate that out into an annual interest. You go in for a payday loan, you know, sort of seeking for some cash to be able to pay your rent, buy your groceries, fix your car. You're charged an interest rate somewhere in the neighborhood of 390% because they're exempted from the criminal rate of interest. And the rest of us should just simply say, you know what, it's okay for somebody to be charged 390% for $500 annual interest. And I think that that's fundamentally wrong. And that's why we're stepping into this area and saying, you know what, and especially when you look at where these establishments are clustered, they're mostly clustered in areas where you have the highest levels of poverty. Because Councillor Pasternak isn't going to go to a payday loan establishment later today seeking $500. Well, unless, of course, he's got some gambling addiction, but not, well, true, but he's not going to go looking for that $500 to fix his car. He's probably got a credit card in his wallet.
Oh, hold on, point of order. Yes, Councillor
Madam Speaker, I
We
know
haven't
that,
had a good one since
I take that
Matt
back. I take it back.
I know that
take it
Councillor
back.
Perruzza probably didn't want to say those words about Councillor Pasternak, and I'm sure that if you ask him, he will.
I take it back.
those
It was tongue-in-cheek, Councillor Karajanis.
Still inappropriate, still
You're-
unparliamentary.
I agree with
And
you.
you
It's
should know
absolutely
better
right.
because
I
you've been
do
in
take
other
it back.
places.
So,
Okay,
Speaker,
okay.
Speaker, the reason why.
Yeah. Councillor Pasternak is, you're okay, right? You're A-okay. Okay, let's continue.
So,
Speaker, I can assure you I don't step foot in a casino.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
thank you, Speaker. I'm so sorry that I said that. Sometimes, you know, there's a disconnect between, you know, my brain and my mouth, and I take that back if I offended Councillor Pasternak in any way. All I'm saying, Speaker, is this: is that these places have a tendency to cluster in low-income neighborhoods. They take advantage of our poor, and they make their life harder. So we are attempting here, in some way, to say, you know what, it's partly our job to take care of folks and try to make their lives a little easier. And I think that some of the recommendations that are in this report will go some ways to doing that. And I just want to speak lastly to the last motion, because I know that that's new and that's not part of the overall package, and that's about the advertisements. And the other day I was driving behind a bus, and on the back of the bus it had this ad. And the ad was, it was like, you know, cash, you know, lots of cash, $100 bills for gold. And while I know that we look at that and we look at those advertisements and we look at those commercials and we all, like, in tongue-in-cheek chuckle about them, but when you allow them on public property, you give that activity a type of legitimacy, a kind of, you know, sort of symbolic presence that that activity is okay. And I understand it. And some people will, you know, will be desperate for cash, and they'll, you know, they'll take their family jewels and seek to trade them, and they invariably get very, very bad trades. But allowing those folks to advertise on buses, to advertise on public property, I think gives them a legitimacy, a kind of credibility that, while on one hand we're saying, you know what, it's wrong to have groups or businesses out there that are, you know, taking advantage of people who are in otherwise difficult circumstances. That on one hand we're saying, you know, we should figure out, we should find a way to prohibit them from doing that.
Your time's up.
And on the other hand, we allow them to advertise on public property, Speaker. So, thank you.
So, we really have questions? Councillor Holliday?
Thank you.
3
Madam
minutes.
Secretary. Councillor Prusa did address it towards the end of his speech, but I just want to go over that. The last item, number 4, talks about prohibiting ads on agencies, boards, and commissions, which I will take to read TTC buses, because Councillor Prusa brought it up. I wonder if the councillor could clarify whether or not those businesses have done something wrong. So he wants to prohibit them.
Yeah, so not that those businesses have done anything wrong, but I remember being on the TTC, and I was chairing the advertising committee, for example, and there was a service, was an internet service who essentially hadn't done anything wrong, but there was a moral issue at play. I forget what the name of the service was. I think it connected married people to other married people, and what was the name of that thing? Huh? Ashley Madison, that's it. And Ashley Madison created a considerable amount of controversy. Were they doing anything wrong? No. Technically, you know, adults can hook up with any other adult, but a segment of our society, and from my perspective, but a segment of our society.
How is this clarification of the
looked
motion?
No, I don't know.
Councillor, we're getting way, way off hand here. Okay.
So what I'm saying is,
Councillor.
no, have those businesses done anything wrong? But they haven't done anything wrong. But what we're doing is we're giving them a kind of legitimacy that, on one hand, we're saying, you know what, you shouldn't be taking advantage of people in this way. And on the other hand, we're saying it's okay for you to advertise on the back of a bus and give you that public legitimacy that on one hand we're saying is it's not okay.
So do you think we can legally even do that?
I think we did it with Ashley Madison. I think we can prohibit anybody from advertising through a policy statement from being able to allow them to advertise on our skating rink boards or on our public library materials or on the backs of buses.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cole, your clarification?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the councillor, perhaps might it not be best to let the commission or the board or agency to determine the efficacy of an advertisement rather than us putting a blanket statement?
I wouldn't disagree with that, and normally I'm like-minded in that way. But here in this report, we are saying very clearly that payday lenders and some of these other folks are taking advantage of some of the residents in the city by charging them exorbitantly high rates of interest when they come in to borrow money and so on. So we're saying that's wrong. We're finding ways to limit them, to regulate them, to limit their expansion through a licensing regime that we're bringing in. So on one hand, we're saying that, but on the other hand, we're saying it's okay for you to be on a library, sort of a library brochure or a TTC bus or on one of our skating rinks or in one of our,
Okay.
advertising your services.
I think you've clarified it. All right. So we can be voting on the item. Councillor Holliday, I understand that you want to vote a recorded vote on number 4, right? Yes. So we have the amendment first by Councillor Peru. Yes, Councillor Holliday.
I also, out of conscience, cannot support item 4 of Councillor Perruzza's, and I wish to vote on that separately, and I think
Okay.
members of council should take note of that.
All right, so we'll vote, okay, so on the amendment by Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Holliday wants a separate vote on number 4, part 4. Okay, recorded vote. This is on number 4. Councillor Holliday wants a separate vote on that.
Part 4 of the amendment carries 18-2.
Okay, on the amendment, on favor, on the balance of the amendment, on favor, carried. On 4, on the report, Councillor Holliday wants a separate vote, recorded vote. This is part 4 on the report. Councillor Holliday wants to vote against that one.
Part 4 of the main motion carries 19-1.
On the item as amended, recorded vote on the ballot. Recorded vote. Oh, thank. Councillor Fletcher, the next item, is that going to be a long item or? Page 7, PH 8.1. Oh, that's tomorrow morning. All right.
Deputy Mayor Minnan Wong, please.
The balance of the item as amended carries unanimously 20 in favor.
Okay, page 7, PH 8.4. Councillor Holliday, you held it down. Do you have questions?
I do not have questions. I'm hoping I've got an amendment ready.
That's on the Chapter 363, Construction and Demolition Bylaw.
Yeah, just to make sure
Okay.
that this is what I submitted. So I'll explain very quickly. I'm happy to support the report as written. This is an additional request for a report back. And it's around construction management plans. It's a learning that I had from a project in my ward where we worked really diligently with a developer. And what we looked at closely was, how are goods going to come and go from the site? Does that conflict with school bus drop off and pick up? Does it conflict with pedestrian routes? How would the cement truck come through the streets? What streets should it use? Should we not allow it to use? And ultimately what we did is we traced a route out of the construction site almost all the way to the highway. And so this is the way we want all the vendors and suppliers of the site to use. And the neighborhood had a chance to go through that and get on board. We realized that one street had a sidewalk, so that was the one to use. And what this is really is asking our staff to look at enhancing what they ask of developers and constructors in their construction management plans, because they don't ask a lot today, and I think there's room to ask for more. And I will take to heart, some recent news stories about collisions relating to vehicles associated with construction. And the thought I had is if we raised the bar on the planning process early on and talked about how the goods movement to and from these sites could work and could work better, to do a little bit of proactive planning, and instead of doing it ad hoc on a voluntary basis like the developer in my ward did, maybe raise the requirements from a city's perspective, we might have better outcomes. So it's not exhaustive, but I wanted to really point out in my motion that one component that had to do with the movement of trucks to and fro from the site and how we protect vulnerable road users, including pedestrians, and do things like contact the school board and say, where are your bus stops? So that we know and we can build that into the plan about when deliveries occur and how those trucks come and go out of the site. So it's not exhaustive, but I hope you'll find that to be a helpful motion and something that will advance us as a city from a safety perspective and from a community perspective, because it gets local residents in on the conversation on how they're going to cope with construction over time in and around their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole, do you have a question? You released the item.
Yeah, but that's why I want to ask the mover a question.
Who?
I want to ask Councillor Halliday a question.
Yes, okay, yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, Councillor, that there was a motion passed by East York Toronto City Council, Community Council, and North York Council dealing with a comprehensive construction traffic management plan undertaken by our Transportation Department and all the major construction partners and the Toronto Police. Are you aware of those two motions that have already been passed by the two community councils?
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if it covers Etobicoke, but the purpose of my motion is not to interfere with that, but to ensure that the construction management plans, which are a current process right now, and where developers right now on a voluntary basis could articulate these type of details, I want to make that a little bit more of an entrenched process. And I realize it may come off as a bit of red tape, but I went through this exercise on a recent development, and it has proven itself worthy of the time spent up front. And I don't want to interfere with that process and what's happening with the industry and with the city, but from a very micro level, with staff, I think we can ask these things of developers and have those conversations up front. I can't see a downside.
But as I said, but aren't you aware that we are doing that? We started doing that 2 weeks ago.
That's great, but I don't know if that process is going to link to construction.
It is.
management
It's going to
plans.
be eventually evolved to cover the whole city.
That's great, but the motion before us and the item before us is around the bylaws and the plans. So, if it's redundant, great. I hope you support it. Maybe it'll mesh together with that process, but this is one particular one that was on my radar, and I wanted to make sure it was highlighted as part of this this item in this consideration.
Thank you. Okay, so on the amendment by Councillor Holliday, on favor? On favor? Carried. Item as amended, on favor? Carried. Councillor Bradford, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
Do I? I do. Thank you, Madam Speaker. That leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion the proceedings of City Council Meeting 10 on October 2nd, 2019.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Crawford, please, and Councillor Perruzza.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously, 17 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Perks, please.
Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Matlow, your vote, please. Councillor Matlow.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries unanimously, 18 in favor.
Okay, council's recessed to tomorrow at 9:30.